Order. I call Alistair Carmichael to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr Everett, and it's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. I'm very grateful to the members of the Backbench Business Committee for allowing time for today's debate, and I'm delighted to see such a good representation, geographic and political, in the chamber for it today. I think, Mr Everett, before we turn to the meat of the politics, as we enter Advent, it's perhaps worth just reflecting for a second or two that in coastal and island communities right around our country, there will always be those families that have a sense of sadness because there's somebody in their family that they will not have with them for Christmas. Last year, 4 people in the fishing industry lost their life. That number goes up and down. In 2021, it was as high as 10. It is worth us always remembering that what we talk about here in the safety and security and the warmth of Westminster Hall is very different from the way in which our fishers actually live and work. They take an enormous personal risk often to put the food on our table, and that is something that we should not forget. Mr Efford, I want to touch on 4 different areas today. First of all, the year-end negotiations that are coming up between the UK, the EU and Norway, looking ahead then to the review of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the transitional arrangements into 2026. The ability of our fishing industry to access traditional fishing grounds and the extent to which they are being squeezed out of them, and finally, the availability of crew for many boats, especially those operating inside UK territorial waters, for whom the opportunity of visas through the transit visa regime is not available, of course.
Can I commend the Honourable Member for Shetland and Orkney for bringing this forward? I've spoken to both him, and I apologise I can't be here. I think it's the first fishing debate I've ever missed in totality. But does the Honourable Gentleman agree? In the meeting that we had on the 5th of November, the Minister who's here today, he discussed the issue of and I quote his words, he referred to positive outcomes that could be attained if these issues could be resolved. The ability to go to sea to catch fish is reliant on having the crews to man their vessels. Despite bringing forward automation projects, their ability to access crews and thereby survive long enough to bring the benefit of these opportunities into local communities. This isn't just a Northern Irish problem. Does my right honourable friend agree that some relatively minor tweaks to Home Office policy would enable the growth potential identified for Northern Ireland and for all this great United Kingdom to be replicated in one form or another? Thank you very much.
Michael.
As interventions go, Mr Efford, that's one that meets its total allowable catch, I think. Look, I'm going to come to this, and the honourable gentleman knows because we've debated it often enough, and if he can't be here for the entirety of this debate, then I think his fishing constituents will know well enough that he is a regular and diligent contributor to these debates, and he'll be missed by the end of the debate if he's not here. Mr Efford, you and I are long enough in the tooth to remember when the December fishing debate, ahead of the December Fisheries Council when we were in the European Union, was a staple of the parliamentary calendar. Of course, things have changed since then. The debate is no longer in government time, but we always have the cooperation of the Backbench Business Committee in holding it. And of course, the feature now tends to focus on the UK, EU, Norway debates. Essentially, we're still looking at year by year by year negotiations. And I'm afraid, even out with the EU, this still remains an absolutely crazy way to run an industry. I mean, I cannot believe that any minister in government would ever go to Tesco and Sainsbury and say, well, we're going to tell you how much business you can do next year, but only for next year. And by the way, we'll not tell you until the end of December, sometimes well into January or February, how much business you're going to be able to do in that. So surely at some point we have to move away from this crazy annual round and get into a proper, stable set of multi-annual negotiations. But we are where we are for the moment, and that's what we have to deal with. So when the Minister comes to reply to the debate today, can he outline, please, what he sees as being the priorities in these negotiations this year? And can I also invite him to reflect a little bit in relation to the role of the science that underpins these negotiations? Because the blue chip science in all this comes from the International Council for the Exploration of the Seas, ICES. That's always complex, it's often quite nuanced, and it's also often, I'm afraid, vulnerable to misrepresentation. It's a kind of mix of empirical data, extrapolation through mathematical modelling, conjecture, and the application of precautionary principles when the evidence is just not adequate. That is then balanced with socio-economic factors and a bit of politics thrown in for good measure. As we look towards the negotiations of the TCA, we will see that that's going to coincide with the arrangements in relation to cooperation on energy, for example. So we're back, I'm afraid, to the situation where we were in the EU days, where there was very often that conflation between different negotiations, and where there was linkage, it was always inevitably, I'm afraid, the fishing industry that lost out. Of course.
My friend is making an excellent case, and in particular in relation to the point he was making about multi-annual quotas and reference to ICES. Does he not agree that, in fact, within that advice, they're very carefully presented in a manner which actually provides governments and ministers and indeed the European Commission to adopt a policy of multi-annual quota for stock recovery? It doesn't necessarily solely push the industry or the legislators into a position where they have to set these annual cliff edges in the way that my honourable friend describes.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I've met many times over the years many of the scientists who contribute to the ICES data, and they will tell you exactly the same thing. You know, they want to see the stability, the multi-annual approach that would allow not just the economic efforts, but also the conservation efforts to be managed together. It makes perfect sense. In particular, though, at the present, there is a real problem. It's not a new one, but it remains a real problem in relation to data-deficient stocks. The problem with data-deficient stocks has very real consequences that then feed through the whole process due to the policy of proposing automatic precautionary quota cuts of at least 25% for stocks in which full scientific advice is unavailable. So if in the current round you look at the examples of ling and lemon sole, they're not massively significant species, but they are important and they're a valuable part of the catch for the fishermen in my constituents, in the whitefish fleet, and they face recurring quota cuts on the basis of the fact that they are data deficient. Now, if you do that year after year after year, then you have a quota that does not match the reality of the fish that are in the sea, and then as a consequence, smaller species like that then become, in a mixed fishery, a choke species. So it's first of all, it's a two-strand problem here. First of all, you've not got proper quota for fish that could be there, that could be caught, that could be an economic benefit to the industry. But secondly, also, they can sometimes act as a choke species, which means that because there's a low quota for them, once they are caught, other fish that are also in a mixed fishery will not be able to be caught and to be landed. The opportunities of getting this right, though, have been highlighted by the northern shelf monkfish, a stock which was, following an ICES review, only recently granted full analytical assessment and is no longer classed as data deficient. This will be a valuable species for the catching sector, no longer to be subject to precautionary quota cuts. But the most significant point of all is that on the basis of the scientific advice, based on full analytical assessment, for the first time, the recommendation now is for a quota increase of some 211%. So that's where the operation of the various principles in ICES can be counterproductive, and it does lead us to a situation where we don't have the best outcome, because you have this mismatch between what's in the quota and what's in the sea. The fault there, I'm afraid, however, very often lies within our own hands, because it comes to the way in which we fund and operate fisheries science within this country. In Scotland, over recent years, the fishery science laboratories that we've had have been salami sliced away to the point of virtual extinction. There has been a chronic lack of investment in fishery science, and something that was previously blue chip and widely respected across Europe, I'm afraid, has been diminished to the point where recent evidence from Dr. Robin Cook, a fishery scientist from the University of Aberdeen, to the Scottish Parliament said, and I quote, "It is of real concern that we no longer have a marine institute in Scotland with the capacity to deliver for the future. The Directorate is dependent only on what it learned 10 years ago." So if we don't put data in, if we don't gather the data for ourselves, then I'm afraid we can't really complain that what we get out at the other end is something which is not fit for purpose. If I can turn now, Mr Effort, to the question of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement review. At the point of leaving the European Union, expectations amongst the fisheries industries, especially in the catching sector, was very high. It was the most obvious industry to expect a win from our departure for the European Union. It was certainly promised one. It really takes something to do worse than the common fisheries policy. But somehow, however, we found ourselves with a deal that the Scottish Fishermen's Federation described at the time as, and I quote, "the worst of both worlds." Now, there is built into that Trade and Cooperation Agreement provisions for review. We're in the transitional arrangements at the moment, and that review will take effect over the course of next year into 2026. I know from the discussions I've had that the EU see this as a priority, and I would like to hear from the Minister that the Government sees it in these terms as well. The core issues at play are obvious. We are looking at quota numbers, specific stock allocations, and of course access. It will take political will from this government to win back the ground that was lost by Boris Johnson, but fishing communities expect positive change to be delivered. The fishing industry has a great story to tell. It is rooted in the island and coastal communities that define our country. The new government has the chance to be part of that story and to close the sorry chapter of missed opportunities. Of course.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. He talks there about stories. I think this is one of the challenges we have about attracting new people into the industry, which is one of the reasons why we're in the visa issues that we have. And indeed, the Scottish Fisheries Museum in my constituency in Anstruther is doing a lot of work in order to promote that. But it needs support, and it needs educational support as well. Does the right honourable member agree with me?
I absolutely do. And this is one of the reasons why it's so difficult for fishing boats in coastal communities to recruit a crew. For decades, we've had teachers, career advisors, probably even their own parents tell them, don't bother going to the fishing. It's a dying industry. It's got no future for you. And when you look at the history of the last couple of decades, you can kind of understand why people say that. I believe they're wrong. And it's going to take a long time, however, to turn that around. And in the meantime, in order for there to be an industry there for the next generation to be recruited into, then I'm afraid we do need to take measures now to maintain them, and for the short to medium term, that requires a more sensible approach to be taken by UKVI and the Home Office, but also I think it requires the industry itself to step up to the plate and to say, we understand that the answer to this in the medium to longer term lies within our own hands, and here is what we as an industry propose to do to make it a more attractive industry for the future.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you giving way. And I apologise that I'm not going to be able to stay for the whole debate or for the ministerial statement at the end. Unfortunately, travel plans intervene. But on this very point, in the summer, representatives of the Scottish Fishing Federation, the Scottish White Fish Producers Association, the Scottish Seafood Association, Seafood Scotland, and the North East of Scotland Fisheries Development Partnership all endorsed the need for a better set of visa arrangements so that we can deal with these labour shortages post-Brexit. Now, would the honourable member agree with me that it might be helpful if the Minister agreed to visit the North East to speak about and meet with representatives of these bodies to talk about how we can address these labour shortages in a more productive way?
I think I'll just take this opportunity to deal with the visa question, which I was going to come to last, but we might as well deal with it in any event. The Honourable Gentleman's right, and especially for inshore fisheries, those who are working within the 12-mile limit, the UK territorial waters. This is an absolute chokehold on them. The bigger boats that are fishing outside the 12-mile limit can take advantage of transit visas. It's frankly an abuse of the transit visa system, but it's the only mechanism that is available to boats to get the system. Now, to get the crew that they need. There have been, in reports and television programmes recently, some quite disgraceful examples of the way in which that has been abused. There are those in the industry who need to take a good, long, hard look at themselves. They have brought shame on the industry in the way that they have mistreated those that they have been bringing in on transit visas. That, although, to my mind, reinforces the need for a proper system of visas to be brought in for what is accepted by the Migration Advisory Council as being an occupation with a shortage of available labour. The crux of the problem is that having got the MAC to designate fishing as a shortage occupation, the Home Office insists on a standard of English language competence which sits somewhere between O-level and just short of A-level in the English system. Obviously, some language skills are necessary, but that standard of language skills, I think, goes beyond what is necessary. We've had crews from the Philippines, from some African countries in particular, for years now, working in our inshore and other fleets, with no real safety concerns for their work. So I really see no reason why they should continue to insist on this particular language level. It is acting as a barrier to the industry getting the crew that it needs. And if we accept that there are bespoke arrangements required for the fishing industry, then to insist that actually they have a language requirement that goes across the whole of the workforce arrangements, it just makes absolutely no sense to me. Of course.
If that were the solution to do away with standards of English language, that detracts from the point the Honourable Lady was making about trying to attract domestic workforce and getting an investment in skills for UK workforce?
No, I don't think it actually does, because apart from anything else, I'm not talking about removing a language requirement completely. It's the level of requirement. It's this requirement of just something short of A-level for English language. It does also, I think, betray a particular attitude to what a skilled worker is. And it seems to me that it's been informed by people who think that you measure somebody's skill only by their academic achievements, whereas in fact the people who are coming to work in fishing boats have a much wider range of other skills for which there are no metrics within the current visa arrangements. And that's why I think, having accepted that there's a need for more visas to bring crew in, to get us to the point where we can do more to grow our own, I think it's unfortunate then that for that reason we basically undo all the good work that we have done. So in relation to the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, if I can go back to that, having taken a fairly substantial detour, the question of access to UK waters post-2026 is going to be critical. For both quota and non-quota stocks, these shares are heavily weighted in the EU's favour, and the EU is more dependent on UK waters to catch its quotas than vice versa. EU vessels catch in the UK zone are worth between £450 and £500 million per year, compared to around the £80 million caught by UK vessels every year in the EU zone. So to put it another way, the UK shares of fishing quotas, as written into the TCA, fall well short of the zonal attachment that was supposed to underpin the negotiations at the time of departure. They do not reflect the reality of where the fish actually are and amount to an annual transfer of at least £400 million worth of natural resources from the UK to the EU. The final cost to the fishing industry is, of course, far greater, as multiplier effects from the fish catches are thought to be significantly, typically assessed at between 2.5 and 3.5. So when it comes to that review, can the Minister tell us who is going to be leading the review? What are the UK priorities for it? And what engagement will he have with the fishing industry to ensure that he is able to deliver for them what Boris Johnson and the noble Lord Frost at the time of the departure so manifestly failed to do? On the question of spatial squeeze, Mr Efford, I'm mindful of the fact that I've taken quite a lot of time, but I'm taking a lot of interventions as well. There are currently 48 offshore wind projects planned in Scottish waters alone. 7 of them are fully commissioned, 2 are under construction. In getting to this point even, the view of the fishing industry is that their voice has simply not been heard, or if it has been heard, then it has been ignored. Many of these offshore wind developments are constructed in highly productive fishing grounds, and there are going to be more on the way. The GB Energy and the County State announced another fishing licensing round just last year. This is something that cannot be seen in isolation. The fishing industry understands the need for change. They are not blind to the realities of climate change. They see the effects of climate change day and daily in their own nets. The loss of cod in some parts of the North Sea, it seems to be down to the changing temperature of the sea, and that's something that's having a real effect on them. They are also, ironically, part of the answer. You know, the fish that is caught by our fishing industry is a good source of protein, caught in a sustainable way in a low-carbon emitting industry. So there seems to be, in the rush to tackle climate change, a determination to squeeze out some of the people who are most able to help us to move to that future. Of course.
To add an interesting fact, following a conversation with my good friend, the Honourable Member for Scarborough and Whitby, who's been talking with her local fishers, who say that actually the population of brown crab in Scarborough and Whitby has gone up as they are making their homes in and around the wind farms that are around. So there is some subtlety and nuance in all of this.
There absolutely is. The picture is complex, and it depends what you're putting and where you're putting it. For some of the spawning grounds, however, for whitefish, which have been affected, then the evidence suggests that there is a problem from the construction. And of course, if you damage your spawning grounds, then of course you're storing up a problem for yourself in a few years down the line. There's a particular issue, though, around floating offshore wind. And this will be for the bigger boats that are further offshore, obviously, because where these floating offshore wind farms are to be constructed, that closes down virtually the whole area of their construction, because it's impossible for them to trawl safely because of the cables that are there for the floating offshore wind turbines. Mr Efford, I've got one other matter that I want to place on record, and where I seek the continued assistance of the Minister. His predecessors in office did take this seriously. It's not actually something that lies within DEFRA, but it matters very much to our fishing community, and that is the safety of fishermen at sea. It's a Department for Transport responsibility. I've had two truly shocking incidents seen in my constituency in recent years. The Pizorsa Dos, which tried to, Spanish gillnetter that tried to fill the propeller of a local trawler, the Alison K, some time ago. And then the Antonia Maria, a French longliner, which it did the same thing to another local boat, the Defiant. Both these incidents happened inside the 200-mile limit, the exclusive economic zone, but outside the 12-mile limit of territorial waters. As a consequence of that, UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, tells us that any safety action has to be taken by the flag state. The flag state of the Pizorsa Dos is Germany, and Germany, I'm afraid, doesn't really see much interest to be had from prosecuting a German-registered but Spanish-owned trawler fishing to the west of Shetland. The position remains dire, though, and sooner or later, if this sort of behaviour is allowed to continue, somebody's going to end up with their boat at the bottom of the seas. This has to be taken seriously. Their representations do need to be made to the relevant authorities in Germany and in France, and we've had some effort on that part by FCDO and Department for Transport ministers, but more needs to be done, because we simply cannot leave our own fishing industry unprotected in this way. The position with the Pizorsa Dos is a very interesting one, because the Pizorsa Dos was fishing not just in UK waters, but also around Ireland. The Irish authorities took a rather different attitude to the hands-off attitude of Marine Scotland and the MCA. They took the Pizorsa Dos into port. She was held there for quite some considerable time, and of course, if she's in port, then she's not out earning money for her owners. And they then literally, possibly, threw the book at the Pizorsa Dos and its skipper. The Irish enforcement agents, when they were climbing on board, found that the ladder provided for them broke. So that was an immediate €10,000 fine for failing to provide safe access. The matter recently finished in the Irish courts with a total series of fines and forfeiture of gear of £470,000. That, I suspect, will concentrate the mind of the owners and the skippers of that boat rather better than the hand-wringing and the legalism that we have in this country. So if we could have a little bit more of that sort of enforcement, it would be enormously welcome. We all know that Al Capone eventually was done for tax evasion. Let's hope that the modern gangsters of the sea might be found to be brought to book in a similar way, if not necessarily for their misdeeds itself.
I've had a number of requests from people who want to leave before the summing up. I cannot allow that to happen, certainly not in such large numbers as the requests that I've had. So if you are intending to not be here, I'm afraid I can't call you to speak. So I would suggest you make interventions. You may find the chair a bit sympathetic if you take a little bit longer on your intervention than normal, because I understand that this is a very important constituency issue. And as you're doing, I remind anyone who wants to speak that you should be on your feet so that I can understand who wants to be called. And the question is that the House has considered the fishing industry. Anna Gelderd, sorry.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd also like to thank the Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland for securing this important debate. As the MP for South East Cornwall, I'm proud to represent a constituency with a rich fishing heritage. Our iconic small-scale fishing fleets and charter vessels from Looe and Polperro and from Foy in the neighbouring constituency are the lifeblood of our communities, a proud tradition passed down through generations, tying our communities to the sea. So I want to pay tribute, firstly, to those who support our brave fishers and their families, the Harbour Master and Port Authorities, the RNLI that I had the privilege of working for previously, Seafarers UK and the Fisherman's Mission. If you haven't bought your Christmas cards yet, may I suggest supporting these fantastic charities that do so much when things go wrong. I'd also like to pay tribute to Cornwall Seafood Training, especially Clive Palfrey of Looe, for his tireless work to raise safety standards and still makes time to helm the Looe lifeboat. This Labour government is rightly committed to tackling climate change and biodiversity loss. Damaging practices have taken a significant toll on the marine environment, and urgent action is needed to secure sustainability of our fishing industry and to restore the health of the sea. Offshore wind is essential to achieving homegrown, clean energy, but developments must be carefully sited to minimise disruption to ecosystems, sensitive habitats and our historic fishing grounds. Marine spatial prioritisation provides a framework to balance these competing needs, but our fishers must be included in decisions. I urge the Minister to ensure that consultations are held in local ports, scheduled around tides, so that fishers can attend without sacrificing a day's income or missing the chance to be heard. This should become the norm rather than the exception, and it's a simple ask, but I know it would mean so much to our fishers and improve government engagement, which is vital. Sustainable fisheries management is essential, and catch limits should be set using latest scientific advice. But the UK currently lacks robust data on many commercial species. I wonder if the Minister agrees that prioritising a roadmap to improve stock assessments and working with partners on shared stocks to secure sustainable management is essential. Better monitoring and enforcement are vital to compliance, but issues with catch app and inshore vessel monitoring must be urgently addressed. Could the Minister seek assurances that the MMO will address this, ensure transparency and timelines on fixes, and adopt a pragmatic approach until these systems are fully operational? Globally, management and enforcement of marine resources are often poor. Stronger labelling laws could block IUU fish from entering UK markets and protect our domestic fleets. I would be grateful if the Minister would commit to a review of the existing labelling laws to protect not just the world's oceans, but our markets. Locally, buying UK products helps to boost incomes for our fleets. And I pay tribute to fishmongers like Pengelis of Looe, who do a great job of supporting their local fleet and offer an overnight service for those without a local shop. I also want to highlight the work of local Looe fishers, Murray Collins, Dan Margetts and David Bond, on the tuna tagging programme, and most recently, Dr. Bryce Stewart and Dr. Simon Thomas on pollock data gathering. I would welcome the Minister's support in expanding fishery science partnerships to fill the knowledge gaps and secure robust data for all of our commercial stocks. I support a transition away from damaging practices that harm our future stocks, alongside advancement in vessel safety and technology. Remote electronic monitoring offers a cost-effective way to improve transparency, sustainability and data integrity while also creating jobs. Better data means better management, which benefits everyone. Fishing is central to the jobs, culture and identity of South East Cornwall, a region grappling with low income. Our fishers are ready to play their part in regenerating our seas, but they need a fair deal that respects their knowledge, safeguards their livelihoods and protects the marine environment. So I'm proud to see this government working with our fishers, and I urge the Minister to continue working closely with both fishers, scientists and all involved to secure a just and a sustainable future for our seas.
Harriet Cross.
you, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. As the member for Gordon and Buchan, I represent a constituency that plays a key role in Scotland's fishing industry. The strategic transport corridors of the A90, the A947 and the A96 that run through my constituency are crucial arteries that our fishing industry relies on for its distribution network. These are vital links that connect our coastal fishing communities to processors and markets across the UK and Europe. I'll touch on three crucial areas today. Firstly, the vital role that fishing plays in our food security, increasing spatial squeeze in our waters, and also, as has been touched on, the TCA. Fish and fishing are part of our national food security, and it should go without saying, yet it is so important that this industry is not overlooked. Indeed, in a 2021 UK Food Security Report, it was stated that fish constitutes a valuable protein source, accounting for nearly 20% of the total annual protein that's consumed globally. And with the consumption of fish only increasing, both globally and in the UK in recent decades, this figure will only increase. And yet, and as we're also seeing on our farmland, our fishing grounds are becoming ever more crowded, with increased pressures for space and competing and often not compatible uses of the marine environment, leading to spatial squeeze. About 37% of the seas around Scotland are now in one of the 240 onshore, inshore marine protected areas, while the industry is also having to be mindful of the will they, won't they potential for highly protected marine areas. Coupled with the expansion of offshore renewable energies such as wind, but also tidal and wave, the space for fishing in our offshores is shrinking faster than ever. Fishing is currently excluded from about a third of Scottish waters, and looking back to the year 2000, this was only at 1%, so we can see the scale and pace of the change. And yes, we do need renewable energy, and yes, we do need to protect the marine environment. And there are important sites like Forvey in my constituency that show this, but we also need proper consultation on how the fishing industry can be increasingly impacted, and that generations of expertise relating to fishing, spawning grounds and species movements must be considered when taking other decisions. The incoming competing pressures in our seas must not be prioritised over fishing or to the detriment of the fishing industry. The current balance does not feel equitable, despite fishing's value to producing healthy, sustainable, low-carbon food, contributing to our food security and supporting thousands of coastal jobs around the country. So, as has been raised, the upcoming discussions on the Trade and Cooperation Agreement for post-2026 are crucial and of real concern to the industry. There's a clear imbalance off our shores, with the EU vessels catching 6 times the value in our waters as we do in theirs. This imbalance doesn't just affect boats at seas, but also the entire supply chain, including businesses and workers in my Gordon and Buchan constituency who form part of the North East fishing industry network. The imbalance does need addressing in the TCA review, and it is an opportunity, but the government must prioritise our fishing sector and not grant inequitable access to UK waters for EU vessels as part of a wider deal with the EU. The rhetoric of resetting relationships must not be at the expense of our fishing sector or our coastal communities. It's so vital that the government prioritises the TCA. There was clearly silence in their manifesto, and this cannot be replicated here going forward, of course.
Thank you. It's clear that fishing and ex-fishing towns like Fleetwood, which I represent, have been devastated by the decline of our once prosperous fishing industry. Mine and lots of other communities were built and thrived on fishing. Fleetwood has suffered terribly from jobs losses and decreased living standards as a result. Everyone in this room knows that our fishing industry is in decline. Does the Honourable Member agree with me that if these negotiations are handled properly, we can see increased investment into our towns that could reverse the devastation to our local economy, which is so important to many communities like mine?
I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention, and I certainly agree, and I certainly hope that is the case. It is really important that these negotiations go properly, and it's really important that our fishing communities are helped and represented, because, as I was going to go on to say, what's spent in the fishing environment has 2.5 to 3.5 times the economic impact on our shores. So it's so important for everyone across the country, including our fishing communities, that these are handled correctly. So to sum up, I hope the Minister will address the concerns of, firstly, what and how we manage spatial squeeze and the growing amount of this that is felt by our fleet. And there must be a proper assessment of the impact on supply chains and distribution networks as well. And finally, as we've said, the 2026 negotiations, the strategy for these will be really important given that they're starting so quickly. But to conclude, and as the Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland also paid tribute to those working at sea, I do want to pay a quick tribute to the RNLI crews. It's a charity really close to my heart, and their brave crews risk their lives to save lives at sea, and they do us all a service, and they do us proud. Thank you.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Efford. Fishing is such an important part of Cornwall's history and its future, as you can probably tell, because half of the MPs from Cornwall are here today. We're surrounded by the sea on three sides, and fishing for centuries has been integral to us. And for hundreds of years, Cornish people have fished for pilchards, from, amongst others, Newlyn, St Ives, Mevagissey and Porthsgatho in my constituency. And I want to particularly point to oysters in the Fal, which have been farmed for half a millennium using traditional methods, as they still are today, due to a bylaw dating back to 1876, which outlawed mechanised dredging, which is an early example of legislation that did promote sustainable fishing. So that means those oyster farms we have on the Fal are one of a kind in Europe, if not in the world, actually. But fishing in Cornwall, of course, isn't about the past, it's also about its future. Our fishing industry is vital for our food security and jobs and tourism, actually, and we need to preserve the knowledge and skills that have passed down through fishing families in Cornwall for generations. It contributes over 170 million to Cornwall's economy directly from fish landed, and we have 500 fishermen at sea and 8,000 jobs in the supply chain. There are 15 jobs ashore for everyone at sea. It does have a future, it does have profit, and we need to make sure the conditions are right and that we protect it. So how do we do that? I want to repeat some of the points made about the EU-UK negotiation process to set the fishing quotas for next year. It is currently ongoing. In previous years, we have seen reductions to some quotas have been too large for fishers to adjust to. For example, the pollock quota last year was set to 0 with no warning, and Cornish fishermen ended up being compensated. The last 2 years of annual negotiations have led to a 20 million reduction of fishing opportunities for the Cornish fishing fleet. So we do need to look at a long-term approach to these quotas, ones that balances the food production with protecting the environment and promoting sustainability and supporting the industry. And that should be based on that scientific evidence, as we've been talking about. As a result of the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement under Boris Johnson's government, fishing was basically sold down the river, and Boris Johnson's name is not spoken of kindly sometimes in Cornwall. So when the renegotiation comes back up, we do need to look very carefully to see that our Cornish fishers don't lose out like that again. And I referred to the Fal oysters earlier in my speech as a vital heritage industry in my constituency. And there is currently a review ongoing to look at the size of the oysters caught to protect the population. And that's something that I would like the Minister to look at closely and pay close attention to. I think that was passed up to DEFRA in April or May, I think. Central to that, of course, is clean water. Sewage dumping is destroying the shellfish industry. In May 23, 11 shellfish sites in Cornwall were forced to close due to high levels of E. coli. And I welcome the Special Measures Water Bill, which will crack down on water companies dumping that sewage, and the review that is upcoming. And of course, agriculture will have a part to play in that as well. Shellfish was an afterthought in those Brexit negotiations. There were extra red tape, reduced markets, and as the UK is now a third country, we can't export unprocessed oysters, scallops and mussels to the EU, so there's a massive loss of markets there. So in conclusion, we do need to look carefully about how we balance fishing, MPAs, sustainability, nature recovery, the environment, and of course floating offshore winds. Now, as an MP in Cornwall, I'm a great supporter of floating offshore winds and would love to get it off the ground in the Celtic Sea. We still haven't quite got there yet. I do want that kick-started. But of course it is important that everything has its space and that consultation is wide and is done with all of the industries. Equally, we do need a strategy for the ocean. At the moment, that's something we don't have. We have a local plan for the land. We have nothing similar for the ocean. And it's very, very important that there is a long-term strategy looking at protection of certain areas, looking at our ambition for zero carbon energy electricity by 2030, but still maintaining those profitable and vitally important heritage industries like fishing to carve out a place for everything as we go forward.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to serve, and congratulations to the right honourable gentleman for securing this important debate. Fish and chips, Chair, were deemed so critical to morale during the dark days of the Second World War that they were not rationed. And extra resources were allocated to keep the home fryers burning. Today, the harvest of fish and seafood from our pristine waters is hard won. It's estimated that fishing crews face the threat of death at 100 times the rate of the average UK worker. In my constituency of Dumfries and Galloway, the Isle of Whithorn will never forget the loss of 7 of our sons when the scallop dredger Solway Harvester foundered off the Isle of Man in a force 9 gale 25 years ago in January. The 2 youngest victims were aged just 17. The sea is magnificent and unforgiving. Chair, today's fishermen face the terrors of the deep and onshore threats too. Fishing in the southwest of Scotland centres on scallops, lobster and crab, and the economic contribution of catchers and producers is vital to vulnerable coastal communities. Yet, fishermen are criticised as voracious plunderers, when really they are cautious custodians of the sea. It took sterling work from my colleague Finlay Carson, MSP, to stave off the threat of the loss of livelihood for static gear fishermen along the Solway coast. The clunking fist of the Scottish Government was set to ban them inside a 6-mile limit to save buried or egg-bearing lobster. But it was the fishermen themselves who spoke up about returning buried lobster to protect the livelihoods of not just themselves, but for the next and future generations of fishermen. Chair, Brexit could yet deliver a sea of opportunities to our fishermen, for if you spend time at the quaysides and pierheads of Kirkcudbright, Garlaston, Port William, Stranraer, Port Patrick, you will not hear any clamour to return to the hated common fisheries policy of distant and faceless Brussels. In 2022, landings in these places were estimated at £4.5 million, an enormous shot in the arm for a rural area such as Dumfries and Galloway. And as we've heard, while the sea is vast, it is not limitless. Floating offshore wind is just one of the sectors exerting spatial squeeze, for you cannot fish between their turbines and their seabed infrastructure is another impediment. Shipping lanes, undersea cables, as important to Britain today as the convoys during the Battle of the Atlantic, further hem in our fishing fleet. Plans for more marine protected areas in English waters to offset environmental damage in existing MPAs has also been suggested. Fishing already pays the price of being excluded from prime fishing areas through privatisation of the seabed, and being locked out of MPAs adds insult to injury. Chair, the waters are choppy, but fishing is a touchstone in Scotland. St Andrew, our patron saint, was a fisherman. Fishing is also food security, and so it's terrifying to hear in some quarters of this pivotal industry being touted as a mere bargaining chip as the government prepares for TCA renegotiation. I certainly will.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. He mentions the forthcoming TCA, and others have referred to it as well. Would he agree that it, because we haven't yet heard who the chief negotiator for those for that review will be, but would he agree that it would be advantageous for that individual, once they're identified, to come to Scotland, to listen to the industry, to listen to fishermen and women, and to the fish processing sector as well, to hear their concerns in advance of those negotiations?
For that intervention, and I do agree that it's important that the voices of the people directly involved in the industry, both onshore and offshore, are heard in this. It's absolutely vital. And on those TCA negotiations, nothing not quota or anything else, must be exchanged for automatic access for EU boats. Chair, war could not choke off our fish suppers. Can we make sure that legislation doesn't?
Neon.
Serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting this debate and to extend my thanks to the Right Honourable Gentleman for corralling us all here for this very important debate. As co-chair of the Fisheries All-Party Parliamentary Group, he is a substantial expert in this field, and we have debated it many times. I'm delighted to be back in the House and able to participate in these. Thank you. Able to participate in these discussions today. I did want to follow on a little bit. I mean, I agree with so much of what the Right Honourable Gentleman said in his opening speech, which is very reflective of his years of experience on this topic. I think on the anticipated 2026 finalisation of the transitional arrangements review, I wonder if I could ask the Minister just to bear in mind that the catching sector is willing and able as a partner to work and support the government with all of the facts and arguments that it needs when those negotiations are entered into. I'm sure that he will have heard the requests that have been coming through the speeches that have been made today, and I add to those slightly to ask if there is some consideration, if perhaps if there could be an indication about the government's ambitions and its aims and its approach in those negotiations, what it's planning to do, particularly, I think, on achieving those longer-term settlements rather than this year-on-year negotiation. Nobody can effectively run a business in those circumstances, and we wouldn't ask it or expect it of any other sector. If we are intending to show respect to the fishing industry, then addressing that, I think, would go some way to supporting the government's intentions. I do think that we've got a golden opportunity to demonstrate our support for the sector. But I do remind everybody, and I'm going to talk an awful lot now about processing, that it is not just the catching sector. As a Member of Parliament for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes, it will be no surprise to anybody that the processing side of the industry means so much to our local economy, to those who continue to work in the industry, and to those small and large businesses who are operating in the processing side of the industry. I mean, my constituency plays such an essential role in serving the nation when it comes to seafood. Almost every major UK food retailer buys their seafood from Grimsby, and the town really does continue to be a thriving hub for seafood processing, whether that is bespoke smoking from 150-year-old smokehouses. I think the Minister enjoyed a visit to my constituency to see that in action, really embracing the traditional techniques of smoking a high-quality product and delivering those to around the country, but also to very high-end retailers. You know, from Grimsby to Harvey Nichols might seem like some long stretch, actually just a short hop through our seafood processing sector. Good quality food production buildings are very hard to find, whether that's cold store or processing factories. But Grimsby is home to some of the best sites anywhere in the UK. We've got around 500 food-related companies processing 70% of the nation's seafood, most of which, has to be said, currently comes from Norway, Iceland, the Faroes, coming, frozen, shipped, and transported through our local ports. Not quite the romantic notion of what the fishing industry is or should be or possibly could be of direct catching locally and then being processed. The world has changed, and I think it is worth remembering that, that this is the reality of the sector and of the industries that it continues to support in communities. Grimsby is widely regarded as the seafood town. On the way in, on the train, you will see remnants of a sign that called us Europe's food town. Perhaps we don't ever want to mention Europe quite so closely in Grimsby anymore, but the industry is now worth more than £2.5 billion every year, so nothing to be shy about. But I know that that success hasn't always been the case, and firsthand, my constituents are not afraid to dig deep when times are tough. And following the decline of the trawling industry that we have seen in so many coastal communities across the nation, Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes stood tall and proud and adapted. And that adaptation to focus on the supply chain and processing of seafood means that currently across Grimsby and the wider Humber region, there are 6,000 people directly employed in over 50 approved seafood processing units. And it's not just processing that our area holds expertise in. As of this year, I'm proud to say that the next generation of seafood professionals will hone their skills at a dedicated new training facility in Grimsby. The UK Seafood School at Grimsby Institute will provide the next generation with the skills and the knowledge that they need to thrive in the industry, with up to 75 students being trained in using those facilities in the school's first year. I was very pleased to go to the opening and experience the skills of the first tranche of new students. And it is so important because actually the price of fish, which used to be a throwaway comment, but it is very expensive as a product now, and the risks that retailers are prepared or processors are prepared to take in the training, it's very high in terms of wastage and potential wastage of product. And so this route to encourage young people to be creative and see seafood as being something that is high-end and is specialised, I think is incredibly welcome. And it doesn't stop there. The Minister will be pleased to know the University of Lincoln is going to be opening a Centre of Excellence, and that will focus on the high-need skills in the processing sector to support people in the local area into high-skilled, well-paid and long-term processing jobs. I was quite surprised to learn that a skilled, experienced filleter can be earning in the region of £70,000. They are so in demand and have so little wastage on the excess fish that those are the kinds of prices and salaries that they can expect. Tough a job as it is well remunerated. So the government does have a role to play in enhancing and advancing this industry, and doing that through its negotiations is essential. The Minister will know I've raised previously the issue of the distant water fleet, and starting to engage thoughtfully in the latest rounds of negotiations with our international allies would be very welcome. Many businesses in Grimsby have benefited from multi-million pound infrastructure and skills grants from the UK Seafood £100 million fund, and I have written to the Minister previously about that to ask about the status, the future status of the replacement for that, which actually in terms of supporting coastal communities that do have fishing sectors would be incredibly appreciated, because it has been used to create investment, extend jobs, create new jobs and upskill the local community so they are able to access those opportunities in my area. And given the success of the initiative, I do really think it would be helpful to understand if there is a plan to have a similar scheme to be reopened, so that local businesses and our local seafood cluster has the opportunity to continue to benefit from that support. And finally, I would like to touch on the importance of the fishing industry, not just this government's commitment to economic growth, but also its commitment to building the healthiest generation ever. As I'm sure colleagues are well aware, and it has been mentioned previously, fish is a cornerstone of a very healthy diet, rich in essential nutrients such as omega-3 fatty acids, high-quality protein, vitamins, minerals, and those nutrients are vital for healthy heart, brain function, and reducing the risk of chronic diseases. By incorporating more fish into our diets, we can significantly improve our overall health and well-being. I say this, I had salmon at lunchtime, Mr. Chairman. I hope everybody else did. I was going to do a show of hands, but I won't, I won't embarrass people. Encouraging the consumption of fish not only helps individuals to lead healthier lives, but also reduces the burden on our healthcare system by preventing diet-related illnesses. Where I end up with this is we have got a food strategy as well as food security strategy. We have a food czar, I think, in Henry Dimbleby. We have got great structures like the NHS. We have got great programmes of providing lunches in schools. Can we possibly incorporate those aims into a state function, such as ensuring that fish is on the menu on a regular basis to people who are in the NHS or care homes or education, so that they can benefit from all of the goodness, and that will help to support our sector as well as anything else. And I would also just say, on the topic of delicious food, if anybody is in the vicinity of Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes, you'd be more than welcome to come and join me in some of our world-renowned chippies, whether that's Ernie Beckett's or the Ocean Fish Bar, Wyber's Chippy or Steele's. I recently went to... I'm always buying. You can be certain that you will have the best fish and chips served here in Grimsby and Cleethorpes. There are other elements that throw some risk into the future of some of those stores, though. We are currently undergoing consultation on pedestrianisation of Cleethorpes Marketplace. The Honourable Gentleman from a sedentary position giggles. However, it is very serious. Steele's has been in existence in the Cleethorpes constituency for over 100 years. It is incredibly well known, it is incredibly traditional, and they are so concerned about some of these environmental changes that they worry that they will be forced to close their doors in the next 10 months because of the anticipated pedestrianisation and roadworks, which is very problematic and does not encourage people to eat more fish, which they should be doing, Mr. Chairman. I did say it would be a slight detour, but I'd get back to the point. I just want to conclude, Mr. Efford. You know, the future of the fishing industry in the UK does hold significant promise, both in terms of supply and production. By continuing to support and invest in this essential industry, we can ensure its sustainability and growth, which will not only bolster our economy, but also enhance our food security. And the government's role in facilitating favourable trade agreements and providing direct investment is crucial. Thank you.
Andrew George.
Thank you very much, Mr. Efford. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and it's also a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Grimsby and Cleethorpes. What I suppose is best described as a commercial break in our proceedings, as she did a fantastic job in marketing the health and other benefits of consuming fish. For me, this is a bit of a deja vu in that I remember my first fisheries debate in 1997, for heaven's sake, the annual fisheries debate, when we used to undertake those in the chamber itself, and indeed in those days, one of the annual features of that debate was the then honourable member for Great Grimsby, as it was known then, the late Austin Mitchell, who was temporarily renamed by Deed Poll as Mr. Haddock, as I recollect. So enthusiastic was he to promote the fishing industry, as indeed, I don't know whether the honourable member who wants to intervene on me now is proposing to have a name change herself. She's certainly moving in that direction, given the nature of what she's told.
It's funny you should mention that. I made very clear in my maiden speech in 2015 I would not be changing my name to haddock or any other fish species. But interestingly, Austin changed his name by deed poll to Austin Haddock, very famously, carrying a Harry the Haddock inflatable to Parliament. But we don't believe he ever actually changed it back.
George.
and we're very sad at his demise and to be reminded of that. And indeed, I should reflect on one of the very appropriate, and certainly we were doing that in those days, reflecting on the risk which people take, as my right honourable friend, member for Orkney and Shetland, quite rightly reminded us of, that those who risk their lives to put fish on our table, and that is something which we do reflect on. I remember indeed in 1997 that during that year we lost 7 men in the industry in my constituency alone, and it was just after the recent loss of the Margaretha Maria, with the loss of four men from Newlyn, 200 miles off the coast of West Cornwall at the time. It's just a reminder, and we've sadly lost other in the industry since that time. It's well worth reminding ourselves just what a hazardous trade indeed it is. It's also a pleasure to see the Minister in his place, and I thank the Minister for coming down to my constituency and visiting Newlyn and Sennan back in the summer, and the interest and the genuine interest, which I think certainly impressed all of those that met him. The genuine interest he took in the industry, both at the catching sector but also the processing and marketing sector as well. So I am grateful to the Minister indeed for that. I come back to this debate after a decade sabbatical out in the real world, which is a very pleasurable place, I must say, and reflecting on a number of changes which have taken place within the industry since that time. And we obviously, the B word, not that we want to kind of go back into the skirmishes of Brexit this afternoon, but certainly that has been obviously a momentous change, and certainly during the period I was away, the fishing industry and the fishermen were used as the poster boys for the Brexit campaign. And I have to say they were sold a very cruel hoax in terms of the outcome, as far as the outcome of the vote itself, and certainly made a lot of promises which have not been fulfilled at all. I mean, indeed, I was prepared to concede that there was a major opportunity. Yes, that actually the one sector within the UK economy which could potentially, and I was prepared to concede, achieve a benefit as a result of Brexit, was the fishing industry, and indeed that has not been delivered, and those people who made the promises at the time just walked away from the industry after they come down to places like Newlyn to have their photographs taken for the purposes of their referendum campaign, and it's caused a lot of bitterness, I have to say, within the industry. But nevertheless, we move on, and we move on to issues which, as my right honourable friend said, I mean, the common fisheries policy was often described as the worst possible policy apart from all the others, because it's a very difficult industry indeed to manage, as I think the Minister knows, and as indeed we all know. And one of those factors which I remember 10 years ago being engaged in these debates is there was a genuine belief that we could move the industry away from the annual cliff edge of the quota negotiations to a multi-annual system which would enable the industry itself, the catching sector especially, to plan 5 years ahead. Yes, there will be adjustments during that 5-year multi-annual rolling programme, but nevertheless it would provide a greater degree of certainty. And as I said in my intervention to my right honourable friend, the science in fact enables that. If you want a recovery programme for most of the stock, there is no reason why you cannot actually project forward 5 years, not with great certainty admittedly in 5 years hence, but certainly have an indicative quota going forward over that period, which actually would help the industry plan its way to the future. Another outcome for the industry in my area has been the detriment to the very significant export trade that was being undertaken, and a number of those companies that were operating, particularly at the smaller end, admittedly, have gone out of business as a result of the impediments, which inevitably and predictably were going to be placed in their way, particularly those involved in the export of live fish to the continent, and that was something which was both predictable but avoidable, and has clearly had a detrimental impact on the local economy. But nevertheless, our local community adjusts itself to the challenges which it faces. My honourable friends for South East Cornwall, and indeed for Truro and Falmouth, have made some excellent cases on behalf of Cornwall's fishing industry and the very important role it plays in the local economy. And indeed, the Cornish Fish Producers Organisation produced a report which I know was handed to the Minister, called The True Value of Seafood to Cornwall, and in that, what it shows is that the value to the industry to the economy of Cornwall is £174 million gross value added per annum, with 500 full-time equivalent jobs just in the catching sector itself, and that equates to about 8,000 jobs in the seafood supply chain as well. So it's a very significant player in the Cornish economy, and often ignored, but nevertheless very, very important, particularly in my part of Cornwall, with Newlyn as being the largest port, a very significant market there as well. My old friend, the member for Truro and Falmouth, also referred to the need for a fishing and marine strategy, and certainly that's something which I hope that the Minister will be taking on board, and both the opportunities as well as the challenges of rolling out, as the government must, and indeed with our support, the offshore wind programme and the Flow project in the Celtic Sea, one which we in Cornwall are very keen to ensure achieves maximum benefit to the local economy and the community. But there's no reason why it can't be rolled out in a manner that actually enhances fishing opportunities rather than actually creates detriment to the industry. But that does require the Minister and energy ministers and others engaging in dialogue with the industry to make sure that the location and planning of those sites is undertaken with great care. I just wanted to really draw the Minister's attention just to one of the probably unintended consequences through a little story, if you like, of the consequences of decisions taken and the impact that it has on an individual fisherman from my constituency as a result of the moratorium on pollock or the cut in pollock quota. There is an inshore, one of my inshore fishermen from Cadgwith who fishes from Newlyn has been affected by that restriction, as my old friend, the member for Truro, says, compensation was offered to the industry, and many of those who received that compensation then used those funds, because they're naturally they're fishermen, went into other sectors where in fact there was pressure. I mean, like for example, the crawfish sector, which the industry is trying to protect and undertake a recovery program, well, there was no reason why they couldn't then buy invest in the gear necessary in order to catch crawfish. And as a result of that, there's been a detrimental impact on the efforts to achieve a recovery programme. Yes, I will. I'll happily give away that.
To clarify, because my understanding in relation to pollock was that whilst it wasn't the case that the TAC was set at 0, the scientific advice that was given out in the June was that it should be 0.
Yes.
But actually my understanding is that there were 925 tonnes was actually the quota that was set. And actually even now, if you look, the stocks are much lower this year as a result of not keeping in line with the scientific assessment.
Yes. Well, I'll come on to that in a second, just because of the nature of what happens off the Cornish coast and certainly southwest and other areas, which is that pollock is caught in an ultra multi-species environment, and so it's impossible, nevertheless, to actually catch pollock even though you're targeting other species. And indeed, he helps me make the point. So my constituent went and targeted hake. Now, I mean, the first thing to bear in mind is that although while he was targeting pollock, he was in the region of between 8 and 20 miles off the coast. To target hake, he had to go 40 miles or beyond. And that placed his small boat in significantly greater danger. So, in other words, it put him at greater risk in order to pursue an alternative fishery. So that's point number one to bear in mind. The second is that there is a pollock bycatch if you're targeting hake, and during 1 month, it was March last year, he caught more than 100 kilograms of bycaught pollock, which he was entitled to land in the market, and indeed required to land into the market. He couldn't throw it overboard, so he was obliged to land this fish. And as a result of which, he then had his license frozen by the MMO. And then, following some dispute, he was then further fined £1,000, and then had to move out of that particular fishery. Now, of course, he wasn't targeting pollock at the time, trying to avoid it as best he possibly could. The MMO didn't offer him any kind of solution to the problem which he found himself with, and so as a result of all of that, he's then come out of that fishery and has since been targeting crawfish, which, as I said, the industry itself had undertaken a voluntary measures to increase the minimum size, and had undertaken other voluntary measures to help recover the stock. And indeed, the minimum size proposed by the industry and implemented in Cornwall has since been picked up, adopted in national legislation. So, so since that time, I mean, the crawfish season is now over, and so you now have a fisherman who has now tied his boat up and is no longer able to fish. So the point is that I hope that the minister, when looking at this, bears in mind that when we propose regulation infecting the industry, it's effectively a two-dimensional policy affecting a three-dimensional reality, and that's the problem. And I hope that the minister will reflect on the lessons learned just from that little anecdote when considering how policy is implemented, and the unintended detrimental consequence, which actually doesn't help even the species that it's supposed to protect. So I certainly hope that in 10 years' time we aren't coming back here gnashing our teeth on the same issues and continuing with this annual bun fight where we don't even know what the quota is going to be in just a few weeks' time, and we have multi-annual quotas. And indeed, one of the best ways of helping the industry is to provide them with all of the capacity to actually manage the industry better themselves, and for us as politicians to try and stand back and keep out of it. Thank you very much, Mr. Efford.
Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Efford. It's a pleasure to speak with you in the chair, and my thanks and congratulations to the honourable member for Orkney and Shetland for securing this debate. I hope that in the coming years the government will find time to return the annual fisheries debate to the main chamber. It was a good convention that the last government cast aside, almost as quickly as they did their promises to fisherfolk following Brexit. I'm sure that many of us today would welcome its return. This debate takes place in the season of the annual fisheries negotiations between the UK, the EU, as well as the trilateral negotiations with Norway. And last year, those negotiations resulted in more than half of catch limits being set above scientifically advised levels. Yet both international law and UK law require that all stocks should be at sustainable levels. This is despite commitments under international treaties and agreements to end overfishing. We currently have 6 commercially fished stocks, 2 cod stocks, 2 whiting stocks, 1 herring and a pollock, that are so depleted that the scientific advice from ICES is for 0 catches. We need to understand just how poorly managed these stocks have been. ICES provides 0 catch advice for a stock when it is so depleted that even without any catch, it will not recover above the BLIM reference point. BLIM is the biomass limit, the limit reference point for spawning stock biomass, below which a stock's reproductive capacity is compromised and is considered to have impaired recruitment capacity. In other words, the stock has collapsed. It's important to note that the decline of these stocks was not unpredictable, nor was it unavoidable. Consistently fishing at too high a level guarantees that stocks will decline. And if fishing is high enough, that stock will collapse. Of course I did.
I thank the Honourable for giving way, because this is an interesting area that he's touching on here. When he looks at these 0 quota recommendations, what he's talking about there in relation to the ICES advice is what's called the headline advice, which basically asks the question, if you want the stock to recover in 12 months, what would you have to do? Now, if you ask that question, then of course you're going to get the answer that the honourable gentleman brings to the chamber. In point of fact, if he looks back to the early years of this century, he will see that the cod recovery plan, which we implemented and which was the dominant feature of fisheries management in the North Sea at that time, was something that went over, I think, 10 years, certainly 5. So the ICES advice is he portrays the ICES advice as accurate, but there is a lot more nuance underneath that headline advice, which he would do well to look at.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. Of course, I am well aware that it's headline, and I'm well aware that there are other things that come into play. But as he himself mentioned in his opening remarks, the things, I think he called them the nuances that come into play, are often political nuances, and he mentioned it himself in his opening remarks, I think Hansard will record. And that means that actually the stock is driven down even further. There is no cure for a collapsed stock that involves continuing to overfish. Take Celtic sea cod. That stock has declined by 95% since 2012. Last year, the TAC was set, the total allowable catch, was set at basically the level of the entire adult population. It was actually set just 2 tonnes lower. And now the entire spawning population is lower than that. If we roll over this TAC, we would be in a situation where the catch limit exceeds the entire spawning population. Take RAC whiting. That stock is currently about 9% of the level that it is legally supposed to be. International commitments and the Fisheries Act commit the UK and the EU, who share many of those populations, to maintain commercially harvested stocks at a level that can support maximum sustainable yield. The stock is at a mere 9% of that. Not 9% of its natural size, but 9% of the already much lower level that is the legal minimum. This is another stock that's declined by over 90% since the 1980s. Now, climate change represents a significant threat to marine life and to the fisheries that are dependent on a healthy ecosystem. But it wasn't climate change that collapsed these stocks. It was heavy and constant overfishing. We sometimes hear big fisheries interests blame climate change for the collapse, and it certainly makes the recovery of those populations harder. But the truth is we consistently set catch limits above scientifically advised levels, and this has crashed these stocks and will continue to do so as long as ministers are prepared to go into the negotiations and ignore the science. Now, introducing the debate, the honourable gentleman spoke of climate change and cod stocks, indeed. And in recent years, every time they have, with North Sea cod, set quotas at sustainable levels in accordance with the science, the stocks of cod have increased. And every time they've set the quota levels not in line with the science, the stocks have declined. So our understanding of the additional pressures of climate change should be driving us to be even more precautionary in our approach to the protection of fish stocks, not to be pretending that it's the cause of their collapse. And actually, whilst thinking about cod and my honourable friend from Grimsby's remarks about the processing industry, of course, the processing industry in Grimsby, the cod that comes there is actually predominantly from Greenland, from Norway and Iceland, where in fact they do have a much more precautionary approach to setting the quota. So many people here will remember the introduction of the discard ban, or the landing obligation, referred to by the honourable gentleman from Cornwall. Basically a ban on throwing away perfectly good fish that had been caught. And what many people will not know is that this ban only applies to quota stocks. Dab, flounder, gurnard, and all other non-quota stocks can be thrown away at sea perfectly legally, and many are. About 35,000 tonnes of dab are discarded in the North Sea every year. This is roughly 90% of the catch, and it equates to about 5 million fish. Remember this when we talk about the importance of food security. The irony is that dab actually used to have a quota, but the quota was removed when the landing obligation was brought in. The purpose of the landing obligation was to create a real incentive for fishermen to use gear types and fishing methods that reduced unwanted bycatch and led to more selective fishing. It was designed to reduce the choke problem by incentivizing more selective gear that would avoid choke species. Unfortunately, though, it only works if it's enforced. And all the evidence shows that the landing obligation is now being widely ignored. More worryingly, not only is it being ignored, but potential discards aren't even being accounted for in the tax setting process. The only solution to discarding and to improving scientific assessments is for the introduction of remote electronic monitoring, specifically cameras. Without that, it's impossible to know what is being caught and what is being discarded. Monitoring is essential for compliance. At the moment, we have a system that literally incentivizes bad behavior. And I was very taken by the honourable gentleman who spoke about his fisherman with pollock. A fisherman who spends money buying more selective gear, who abides by the landing obligation, as his fishermen did, and who avoids certain areas because of higher bycatch of unwanted species, is massively disadvantaged compared to a fisherman who ignores those regulations. We are, as it stands, incentivizing non-selective fishing, rewarding illegal behaviour, and punishing those who actually stick to the rules, like his constituent. The fishing industry rightly talks about the challenge it faces. Yet the biggest challenge it faces is from an unhealthy marine environment that is incapable of supporting thriving fisheries. There's this illusion that we can have a thriving fishing industry without a thriving marine environment. You cannot have a growing, sustainable fishing industry on the back of a depleted marine environment. And no measure of government support or access to markets can make up for no fish. Somehow, this self-evident truth goes out of the window when it comes to making decisions. We should be clear. If we do not recover fish stocks, if we do not start setting catch limits at levels that allow stocks to grow, if we don't start adopting a precautionary approach that favours long-term sustainability, then we will be back there every year wondering why quotas have to be cut. There are instances where the advice is for large increases in quota, and they were mentioned by the Honourable Gentleman. I think he quoted a 211% increase when the data became available. I think that was in relation to monkfish, I think. Now, where that's the case, I don't think we should chase down every last fish, because that will simply result in smaller catches in future rears, as well as leading to significant increases in bycatch of other stocks, often resulting in overfishing them. But I think the argument that he made is absolutely right, that we need to get good data, and we need that comprehensively. And once we've got that, and we can base the scientific assessments on really strong data, that's the way to make sure that we're fishing in line with the science and stocks can recover.
On this point.
Yeah, of course, very happy.
I'm grateful to him because he's absolutely right. This is where it does come back to the point I made about data and about the science that you then base the data on. He will have heard, doubtless, in many of these debates over the years, the concern that, in fact, by the time that the data is gathered and processed and goes through the whole ICES process, it is several years old. So, in fact, it's not reflective of the fish stocks at the point at which the decisions are made, but some years earlier. Surely the one thing which everyone can agree is that the better the data gathering, the better the science, the better it is for fishers, conservationists and anybody with an interest in the seas.
Well, I'm delighted to agree with the Honourable Gentleman who chairs the EFRA Select Committee. And I think it also actually adds grist to the mill of the 5-year approach. But I do think that we perhaps need to be careful that it's perfectly reasonable to move to a 5-year approach, but it wouldn't necessarily immediately lead to us increasing quota. And it might actually, in the first year certainly, lead to a more precautionary approach because one was looking at it over the 5-year period. And that might not be something which his constituents would appreciate so much. We've heard today about spatial squeeze, about how the fishing industry is no longer having unfettered access to the entire oceans. That's true, but as has been pointed out, it's unavoidable, and indeed for wider sustainability reasons on our energy supply, it's important. But it's also an argument for acting in a way that grows our fish stocks.
Would you just give one on that point?
Of course, very happy to.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just on that point, on the renewable side of things, and there is an opportunity to bring the industry into consultation with the likes of the Crown Estate at a much earlier stage, so that the voices of all of those co-located spatial sharers can be heard and planned around. And there are some examples of some good relationships between offshore wind developers and fishing communities.
I'm delighted I sat down to receive her intervention because she's entirely right. And actually, I think what she said goes to the remark that our honourable friend, who I know because of illness is no longer in her place, but the point that she also made, Madam Chairman, in relation to ensuring that those consultations happen in accordance with the tides, so that fisher folk are actually going to be there to be at the consultations and not when they're out at sea. And I thought it was a very, very interesting remark that she made on that point, because sometimes it's not always appreciated. I'm very happy to, of course.
Just on he seems to be implying that the fishing industry is resistant to any conservation measures and would resist the kind of proposed management measures that inevitably have to be brought into the industry. I mean, from my experience, very often it's the industry themselves or from the industry that propose changes in order to protect their stock for the future. For example, the Trevose ground closure off the north coast of Cornwall during the spring of this year is something which was proposed by the industry itself.
Yeah. Look, if I've given the honourable gentleman the impression that I think that fishing communities would be against this, no, and that's precisely why I welcomed the remarks of my honourable friend from Grimsby and from South East Cornwall, about the importance of consultation. And if you look at a case such as Lyme Bay, it was the local community in consultation with the scientists who actually produced the efflorescence that's taken place there. So absolutely not. This must be done in line with the industry, cooperating with the scientists. We should note that MPAs were designed specifically to protect nature within those areas from human activity that damaged them, and that does include from fishing. It should therefore not be considered a negative that those areas are being protected, and the partial ban on destructive dredging and bottom trawling in MPAs, I think, has been a success. And I hope it will be extended to a complete ban once the due process and consultation has taken place. So I wish the Minister and his team well in the upcoming negotiations. If he binds himself to the mast of science and turns an Odysseus-like ear to the siren voices urging him to allow greater quota, I can't promise him popularity, but he would become a unique and respected first voice for common sense and a sustainable future for our industry. Now, Chair, first-hand sales of UK landed seafood, point that my honourable friend from Grimsby made, was over £1 billion in 2022. It's a good reminder that wild capture seafood is a national resource. It's remarkable, really, that the UK Treasury doesn't benefit directly, and that those who benefit the most are large businesses that have managed to aggrandise themselves via the poorly regulated sale of individual quotas over many years. Small-scale fisherfolk and non-sector vessels are left to fish from the pool, which accounts for just 4% of opportunities. In addition, those big businesses that benefit the most by their control of quota also benefit from the free management of the resource via central and local government funding of the MMO, CFAS, Natural England, and the IFCAs. It's also clear that big businesses are best placed to make representations and influence policy in a way that a single-handed inshore fisherman simply cannot. A quick scan of successful government grant applications demonstrates that it is also big business that benefits from grant schemes, with support being provided to companies that have the turnover in millions. The result of market forces on this national asset have left a handful of families and businesses benefiting the most via consolidation of beneficial ownership of quota, while small-scale fisherfolk and our coastal communities wither and are lost. Depleted stocks, limited funding for robust data collection of all commercial species, leading to precautionary management decisions, are all byproducts of the current system. So I'd ask the Minister, is it time for the UK to consider what alternative systems could look like to manage this valuable natural resource? I welcome the beginnings of transparency that has come about from the publication of quota holdings, but that's only a part of the story of who benefits from this amazing national public asset that is our fisheries. We all know that in-year swaps and leases occur. So would the Minister look at completing the transparency exercise and require those swaps and leases to be published too? We need a system that's not based on the happenstance history of 40 years ago when the current quota system was put in place, but one that provides opportunity and certainty more equitably, a system that links opportunities to compliance with fisheries and conservation regulations and helps fund better data gathering and evidence to inform our fisheries resource management. One where a sustainable bounty of the seas ensures the interests of our small fishing communities, the taxpayer, and the planet are aligned. Now, it's already been said that fishing is one of the most dangerous peacetime occupations. The Marine Accident Investigations Branch accident reports make sombre reading, but they also provide an excellent opportunity for learning and change. Multiple capsizes of small vessels over several years led the Marine and Coast Guard Agency to update their small vessel codes and inspections. But reports around the coast demonstrate that these new regulations appear to be applied inconsistently and in some cases run contrary to the marine architect designs and tested vessel stability. The financial burden of being tied up by an MCA inspection and the requirement to make modifications to a vessel's hull can prove exceptionally costly. Owner-operators are forced to sell their vessels and in some cases leave the industry as they simply cannot afford to comply with an individual inspector's requests. So can I urge the Minister to speak with his colleagues at the Department for Transport to help convene small-scale fishing vessel safety experts to come together and help the DFT and the MCA better to understand the impact of their inspection regimes and find a coherent approach to this vital work that provides a consistent set of outcomes without the lottery of where you're based and the inspector you get producing different outcomes on similar vessels. The lack of MCA inspectors means that vessels can often wait weeks for an inspection slot. Now, while a vessel is waiting re-inspection, the fisherman cannot earn. What should be a straightforward process can provide huge financial risk and strain from which some of these micro-businesses simply cannot recover. Finally, on safety, I'd like to draw the Minister's attention to a simple fact that the last government seems to have done little to address. The MAIB reports set out the circumstances surrounding each accident and the component elements that led to them. All too often, they are highly predictable and preventable by simply conducting good maintenance, onboard training, and safe operations. And here I would interject, Dr. Hartger, that the question of English language that we debated earlier, I think does come into play here, because English language and the ability to communicate with every member of the crew is vital for crew safety, and I'm sure the Honourable, of course I'll give way to him.
Just for the avoidance of doubt, as I might have said in a previous professional existence, nobody is suggesting that a crew should not have English language skills. It is the question rather is the level at which these language skills are required.
I agree with the Honourable Gentleman, and I thought the points that he made on visas were well made, but it is, of course, important that we put safety absolutely at the forefront. Paradoxically, the one common denominator that runs through every report is that the crew involved had all attended courses and attained their required safety and training certificate. So could I gently suggest that it's time for the DFT and the MCA to consider their syllabuses, to see if what is being delivered leaves graduates with the practical understanding they need to transfer to their work environment. I think a review is overdue. The rollout of catch-up and inshore vessel monitoring to the small-scale fleet has been widely seen as a disaster by inshore fishermen. I'm told catch-up is regularly down, and inshore vessel monitoring systems and approved suppliers are not required to provide robust support in a timely fashion, leading to lost days at sea. The stress and anxiety these two systems are causing around the coast is palpable. The MMO has warned during the rollout of both of these systems of the risks of pressing ahead with them before they were fully tested, and in the case of the IVMS, that not stipulating service levels would leave fishermen at the mercy of the providers. I remember we debated this in the Select Committee at the time, but the government simply rode over it. Now, I appreciate the rollout programme was the last government's, but can I urge ministers to urgently investigate what is going wrong with these systems from the user's standpoint and what steps the MMO can do to make it work better. Small-scale fishermen are the beating heart of so many of our coastal communities. It's not a job, it's a way of life, but one that is increasingly difficult for new entrants to be found or gain appropriate training. Many of today's fishermen came into the industry via the YTS, the Youth Training Scheme. It provided college, small salary and on-the-job training. Some of our country's finest inshore skippers today came via that route, but they're now close to retirement. Only large companies now can afford to recruit and invest in new entrants, and over the past decade we've seen a growing reliance on foreign crews, and we have and will no doubt hear more about visa problems in speeches. Some local apprenticeships courses have been met with various success, but they'll not provide the numbers or the pace to replace foreign crews, let alone those fishermen who have reached retirement. When considering the successor funding scheme to the Fisheries and Seafood Scheme, the FAST scheme, I'd be grateful if the Minister would consider what more can be done to help grow our own talent, to build the workforce, and in particular for the small-scale fishing fleet that doesn't have the ability to fund apprentices directly themselves, but have a lifetime at sea and the knowledge to help grow that talent.
Phil Crichton.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and thanks to the Backbench Committee and the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland for this very important debate, and particularly for the tribute he paid to the dangers fishermen face at sea each day, for those at peril on the sea, and the reference as well made by the member for Dumfries and Galloway to the loss of the Solway harvester. I well remember covering that tragedy as a journalist and the shadow that cast on the Isle of Whithorn and Kirkcudbright. My fishing community and the communities I represent are quite different from these constituencies. The Western Isles account for 22% of the inshore waters in what is mostly an inshore fishery, although that may well have been 0% of Scotland's inshore fishing grounds had the SNP Green Coalition got away with their ludicrous plans for highly protected marine areas that the member for Gordon and Murray highlighted. These plans, although defeated, pushed away by a rebellion across Scotland's coast and the songwriting power of Skippenish, have been put away for now. They have created a high level of uncertainty, which means that some people, some fishermen, are deciding whether to stay or leave the industry. In the Western Isles, the picture is mixed, somewhat rosy. We have had something like £12 million worth of tonnage landed in the last couple of years, something like 3,000 tonnes. Most of that, 90% of that, is shellfish, only 11% is whitefish, and Marine Scotland shows that there are 215 registered fishing vessels, small fishing vessels, like the member for Brent East made a case for just there, and something like 290 fishers, who are about 7% of Scotland's national total. And the industry faces many challenges, different challenges in different constituencies, but lots we have in common. And one of the biggest challenges facing the industry and the associated processing sector in the Western Isles is something I will give some attention to. It was a pleasure a couple of weeks ago to go to the AGM of the Western Isles Fishermen Association and see so many young faces amongst the attendees. There are young entrants to the industry, helped by schemes like local council, locally administered schemes which encourage entrants, things like community quotas, in which the Western Isles Council, Cornwall and Shear, has bought and licenses prawn quota to new entrants. All that helps people into the fishing community and has a significant impact on the industry. But that glimmer of hope shouldn't mask what is a problem for the islands industry, for the Scottish industry and the UK industry, and that is the lack of skilled crews. The demographics in the Western Isles are not good, although I talked about young entrants coming in. The working age population has dropped by 12% over the last 10 years, and there's been a 16% or a 26% rather rise in the elderly population. All employers are competing for a reduced number of school leavers, and virtually all sectors are dependent on sourcing migrant labour to grow their business. And that is the most important ask from the Western Isles fishing industry to the Minister. And that it has to recognise that there has to be some flexibility within immigration policy to fit in and to allow the needs and demands of rural and island areas to be accepted. The current sponsored employment scheme seems to have been based on city and urban salaries. It ignores the variation in wages in rural and island communities, which are, of course, are lower and are coupled with increased food, energy and transport costs. And I suspect that the £70,000 salary for a processor that my good friend for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes mentioned has as much to do with the lack of skilled people and the lack of occupation as it does the skills in doing the job. And only this week I had correspondence from Barra, from the Isle of Barra, from Barra Atlantic, one of the large processors, seafood processors in our island chain. Christina McNeill, the director of that company, told me that in 35 years of working in the seafood industry, things have never been more difficult. There's demand, there's huge demand for langoustine, scallop, but to supply customers is becoming increasingly difficult because of the lack of staff. And on a small island, you can imagine how difficult that is. She has 4 Filipino workers who have been employed there since April 23. They came through the sponsorship scheme. But given the nature of the work and the lack of staff available, they need some flexibility in order to retain these 4 workers. They can just about manage the salaries as they are now, but if these were to increase to £38,000 a year, the operation would be impossible. And that's a company that's been in operation for 50 years now and sees its future in the balance because of restrictive immigration schemes. And it's the same issue with fishermen. It's impossible to employ UK crews, as we know. They must look overseas. Cost, again, is a criteria, but so too is the visa system, which means that crews have to have this qualification, this English qualification, to a very high level, which means that they are almost disbarred from entry. It creates huge difficulties for fishing boat owners and processors in my constituency. And the plea to the Minister, echoed by others, the member for Aberdeenshire North and the Moray Coast, who is not here now, the Migration Advisory Council, and almost every coastal community, is that there needs to be flexibility within the visa system. Not a separate visa system, as some other Scottish colleagues might argue for. There's no need to replicate the system. It just needs to have enough flex in it to take into account the needs of highland and rural areas. And sure.
In relation to separate systems, I suspect he might agree with me that the problems of the fishermen in my constituency and his are shared by the problems of fishermen in Kilkeel around the southwest coast and elsewhere in the country. Does that not rather illustrate the truth that the problem is for the sector rather than any particular constituent part of the United Kingdom?
Thank you. I thank the right honourable gentleman for that intervention. And it's true, our problems are not unique island problems, nor uniquely Scottish problems. They are a demographic, economic and social problem for coastal communities around the whole UK. I know that is not entirely the responsibility of the Minister in front of us today, and having risked the ire of the Home Office, perhaps rather than him, I now carry on to risk the anger of my friends and colleagues from Truro, Falmouth, South East Cornwall and St Ives, possibly.
Oh dear.
Because, Mr Speaker, I am after their tuna, or our tuna. One quota the Minister does have responsibility for is the bluefin tuna stocks, which have increased significantly thanks to climate change. Bluefin tuna is roaming far north and wild into the Atlantic. There's been a great, decade-long catch and release scheme around the British coast. The catches show, by rod and line, show that the catches are selective, good quality, of the same stock by those caught in other regions of the UK, and they show potential to be a great home market and an export market. And the UK was allocated something like 39 tonnes of bluefin tuna in 2023, but so far none of these commercial licences have been granted to Scottish boats. In fact, of the 13 licences granted, they all went to the southwest of England. None of the commercial licences have come to Scotland, far less the Hebrides, where operators have set themselves up, not just as rod and line operators, but also set themselves up potentially to be exporters, smokers to the domestic and to the international market. And for all the quota to be allocated to one area seems very odd. It's something that you wouldn't expect to happen. You would expect weight to be placed on geography and on socio-economic impacts, and the bluefin tuna fishery in the Western Isles would be economically significant. And it's deeply frustrating for operators, rod and line operators and others who have prepared themselves to turn commercial, to be frustrated in this way, to be turned off in this way. And I surely will.
Thank you. Not to make too much of this, of course, but if you look at the other side of the energy, Scotland has been lucky enough to get many headquarters of GB Energy. Maybe we could think about it in the alternative as well.
I thank the honourable member for that intervention, and I'll turn my attention to GB Energy in a moment. But I would just make another appeal to the Minister that going forward from next year, that the UK ought to allocate these commercial bluefin tuna licences, not just on first come, first serve, or however the system works now, but on a geographic and social economic basis. And while I have his ear, and while we're on quotas, can I quickly make an appeal on the spur dog fishery, which is managed by the UK government and allocated on a monthly quota basis to all vessels. However, due to the introduction of a management measure banning the landing of individual fish over 100 centimetres, fishermen have been unable to develop a market. All buyers that show an interest in spur dog indicate they would far rather larger spur dog over 100 centimetres, and local fishermen, as a result, end up dumping fish, large fish, that could secure higher prices and did secure higher prices prior to the ban. So some relaxation on permitting the landing of spur dog over 100 centimetres would at least open a limited marketing opportunity for these vessels. And finally, before I leave, and I don't want to kind of wade into the big debate on quotas, on total catch allowances, and 2026, or perhaps I do. I just wish. I just wish the Minister well, and ask him to consider some of the ideas highlighted by the member for that famous fishing port, Brent West, in his contribution, that quota should belong to no one, should not be used to enrich those who are already rich from our seas, and should be treated as a national resource and a socio-economic asset that should be distributed according to port, according to postcode, and according to social economic need. There should also be, as I mentioned earlier in my speech, some kind of system of community quota, where excess quota or new quota is allocated to municipalities or to development agencies, regional development agencies, to ensure that that quota is attached to landing ports and creates local jobs in coastal communities. There's been a lot of talk on GB Energy, on spatial squeeze, on the conflict between the fishing industry and the new industrial offshore wind farm industry. I understand why the conflict would be, and these developments are somewhat controversial. But it would be less controversial is that offshore industry, like the onshore industry, was forced to give a community benefit or a community share or pay more to the Crown Estate Commission for permission to make wealth from wind, which should, of course, belong to no one. And if that money and if these funds were allocated again regionally, locally, then we would address that data deficiency that the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland reference and the member of Brent West reference, in that we could create our own marine research centres in our coastal communities, not necessarily run by the government, but certainly run by these communities. So in that competition for data and that argument with environmentalists and with governments, we can have the science and we can tell what's in the waters around us and we can tell how the environment is shaping up. These are leaps of the imagination, perhaps, for the quota system, but they are things that should be considered quite seriously by government and by the fishing industry itself, if fishing is to have a future as well as having a past. Thank you.
The first of our front benchers for the Lib Dems, Caroline Voden.
Thank you, Chair. It is a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship, and I would like to thank the Right Honourable Member, my friend from Orkney and Shetland, for securing today's debate on the UK fishing industry. He has been a steadfast supporter of the UK's fishing communities for many years, and I would like to echo his words and those of many others in the debate who have paid tribute to all those who have died at sea and the valuable work of the RNLI. Fishing is a subject of huge importance to us as Liberal Democrats, not only because of the economic significance of the industry, but because of its cultural heritage, its role in sustaining coastal communities and its relationship with the health of our seas. We've heard from communities all around the UK's coastline today from many different sectors of this age-old industry. The Honourable Member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East talked about resolving the visa issue for fishers, both in and outside the 12-mile zone, which many others referred to as well. The Member for Gordon and Buchan spoke of the importance of fish as a low-carbon, high-protein food source, which we should be consuming more of. And the Member for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes, very passionate about how we can promote fish and seafood throughout the food chain, and her brilliant food processing industry up in Grimsby. And the Member for Truro and Falmouth, who beautifully referred to Cornwall's proud fishing heritage, and particularly the Fal oysters. And on that point, I would like to once again, while I have him in the room, ask the Minister to reconsider his decision to classify Pacific oysters as an invasive species. They are heading our way anyway. They're going to be here whether we like it or not. So I don't believe this decision makes sense any longer. And after all, sheep were once not a native species of the UK. Things do change. Also, the Honourable Member for Nahelanananir. Did I get that right? Who talked about the importance of encouraging young people into the industry, which is very important for all of us, wherever we are. It's clear for us all to see that our fishing communities have been deeply let down by the previous Conservative government, and that the promises made to them in the run-up to Brexit have been badly broken. Instead of the sea of opportunity, which the member for Dumfries and Galloway optimistically said thought was possible, the industry has been cast adrift, struggling with increased bureaucracy, reduced market access and rising costs. And we believe that fishing communities deserve better. So as we enter this annual negotiation period and approach the end of the transition period in 2026, we must learn from the failures of the past and ensure that the mistakes of the terrible botched Brexit deal are not repeated. And as many honourable members in the room have said, we need multi-annual decision-making now to give the industry more long-term stability. Negotiations on fishing quotas must be conducted transparently and be based on the best science available, with fishing communities at the table helping shape these decisions which will profoundly affect their livelihoods. The Liberal Democrats want a fair deal for fishers, one that sets realistic catch limits, that cuts unnecessary bureaucracy, that invests in infrastructure and creates opportunities for coastal communities to thrive, both on and off the water. First, I think we need to tackle the avalanche of red tape that has engulfed the industry for the last few years. The increased paperwork for customs declarations, export processes and landing requirements has created delays, raised costs and caused untold frustration, as my honourable friend President Ives described. Driving from Cornwall to Dover with a piece of paper to comply with an export requirement is utter madness in 2024. And having to get a qualified vet to personally sign 17 different pieces of paper for one export consignment is ludicrous, and yet this is the reality for offshore shellfish. A high-quality mussel farm off the Devon coast, and I've written here, which I had the pleasure of visiting on a very windy day in September, but I'm not sure it was all pleasure because it was quite choppy. Mussels cannot afford to be held up by red tape. Speed is key when exporting shellfish. So we have to cut down on the endless forms that these companies are being forced to fill in before they can... Yes, I will give way.
With the seafood industry in the early days of Brexit as a special advisor with the Scotland office, and we found that much of the problems with the live export, particularly of shellfish and things like langoustines, actually lay on the far side of the channel rather than our side. And the UK government at that time, I don't know if it's still the case, had a digital first presumption to try and take away those pieces of paper that you're talking about, but in fact it was those in Europe themselves that insisted on that. I'm not sure if the Honourable Lady is aware of that.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware that my predecessor used to say that it was digital first and that the paperwork didn't exist, but I can tell you that 17 pieces of paper have to be signed every time offshore shellfish want to do an export consignment. Now, it doesn't really matter which side of the channel that's coming from. The point is that this was a bad deal which was badly negotiated, and we should never have put our fish exporters in that position. The Liberal Democrats want to see a veterinary agreement signed as soon as possible with the EU to simplify these processes. Second, we must invest in the infrastructure needed to keep jobs and value within our coastal communities. By equipping coastal towns with modern processing facilities, we can retain more of the value generated by fishing within these communities, which will help revitalise local economies, help the coastal communities around the UK and create high-quality employment opportunities, so well described by the Honourable Member for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes. Of course, the future of fishing depends on the health of our seas, and that is why sustainability is at the heart of the Liberal Democrat approach. We believe in a science-led system for managing fishing quotas, ensuring that decisions are based on all the available evidence about stock levels and marine biodiversity, not just the headline advice. And we need to iron out the mismatches between data and the actual situation in the sea. Only when those two things match will we have the best data and will we be able to make the best decisions. The last-minute decision by the previous government, for example, to cut pollock quotas at a stroke, showed the lack of respect that the Conservatives have had for our hard-working fishing communities. And I know of one skipper, like my honourable friend here, I had one skipper who had to sell his boat straight after this. It was just the last straw. And we must have more long-term decision-making so that we're not putting people in this situation at the drop of a hat. We would also establish an innovation fund to support the development of new technologies and practices that reduce environmental harm while increasing funding for marine conservation projects and expanding the network of marine protected areas, but done in consultation with the fishing industry. Protecting our oceans is not just about safeguarding the environment, vital though that is. It is about securing the long-term viability of the fishing industry itself, and nothing is more important to an industry that provides sustainable quality food contributes to our nation's food security and wants to carry on doing that for the long term. In my own constituency of South Devon, fishing is not just an industry, but a way of life for many of my constituents. Brixham Harbour, one of the busiest and most successful fishing ports in England, is a hub of activity and sustains hundreds of jobs and contributes millions to the local economy. And I'm very grateful to the Minister for his visit in July, which was much appreciated by the fishing community, where we do also see bluefin tuna jumping in our waters, as in the Western Isles. Yet the challenges facing fishers in South Devon are stark. I have met with many skippers in Brixham who shared the immense pressures they're under, from rising fuel costs to navigating the labyrinth of post-Brexit bureaucracy. They are deeply proud of their work and their heritage, but they are feeling abandoned by successive governments who've made promises they've failed to keep. We're also facing an acute skilled labour shortage, which many people have spoken about. Despite efforts to recruit homegrown talent through apprenticeships and partnerships, we simply don't have enough skilled crews to operate vessels or enough workers for our processors. As many honourable members have already raised here today, the current visa routes for non-UK workers are wholly inadequate. The transit worker visa, which many smaller operators rely on, does not meet the needs of modern fishing, while the skilled worker visa is unaffordable and impractical for the industry. Its language requirements alone simply just don't recognise the reality of working at sea. So I am asking the government to work together with the Home Office to create a visa system that meets the needs of this industry and supports its sustainability. As we review the trade and cooperation agreement, we must look at what's happened. Operating costs have skyrocketed due to Brexit and the pandemic, compounding the challenges for exporters who are so reliant on EU markets. Administrative burdens and barriers to trade remain a thorn in the industry's side, and these burdens must be eased and smoother trade with the EU must be prioritised. Better access has to be negotiated to weight it more in favour of UK fishers, and it would be really good to hear from the Minister how his negotiators are going to prioritise this. Marine spatial planning, something many people have referred to, must also properly recognise the value of fishing alongside environmental objectives. While the industry supports the goals of the Fisheries Act 2020, the pace and scale of the changes can sometimes feel overwhelming, highlighting the need for careful consideration of the socio-economic impacts on fishers and coastal communities. While we in the Liberal Democrats support an urgent move to renewable energy, is it right that we lease out the UK seabed to develop an industry that will export energy abroad at the cost of the UK fishing industry? Fishing and power can share the sea, but fishers must be properly consulted about the siting of new offshore wind, and there has to be a discussion about those turbines being located in some of our most lucrative fishing waters. So looking ahead, I hope the new Labour government will develop a clear and coherent strategy for the industry, one that takes into account the interconnectedness of environmental and economic objectives. The 2025 renegotiation of the TCA is an opportunity to address these challenges, and I hope the government will consider socio-economic factors also when shaping future policy. Fishing communities deserve far better than the neglect they have endured over the past decade. The Liberal Democrats remain unwavering in our commitment to advocating for practical, meaningful solutions that address the immediate challenges faced by these communities. We will continue to push for reforms that not only secure the long-term future of the industry as a whole, both at sea and on land, but also protect the environment on which it depends.
The Opposition Shadow Minister, Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Dr Huggin. It's a great pleasure to serve under your chairship today. May I first congratulate the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland and the Chair of the EFRA Select Committee on securing this really important debate today on such an important topic for fishermen and women and our coastal communities right across our United Kingdom. Fish are one of our most valuable and powerful resources for our country, and we must protect and preserve and nurture them and support the industries that harvest them for us. His Majesty's loyal opposition is committed to supporting our coastal communities and our fishing industries. We've had a really wide-ranging debate from right across the United Kingdom and some very powerful contributions with a lot of expertise within them as well. The Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland talked powerfully about the negotiations and the importance of science moving forward and the balance between economics and conservation. and touched upon, as was echoed by many members, the importance of safety in this industry. The member for South East Cornwall talked about the importance of data and monitoring. My honourable friend, the member for Gordon and Buchan, who is a proud champion of both her farming and fishing communities, spoke powerfully about the issues of food security and the role that fishing plays within that. Talked about spatial squeezing, the TCA negotiations, and powerfully at the end of her speech talked about the importance of the RNLI and how much we owe to them and to keep people safe at sea. The honourable member for Truro and Falmouth talked importantly about sustainability. My honourable friend, the member for Dumfries and Galloway, who again is a proud champion for his farming and fishing constituents. He talked powerfully again about the safeties and the dangers within the fishing industry, talked about spatial squeeze, and again intervened as well and spoke about his expert analysis of ongoing fishing negotiations, and so that was much welcome. The honourable member for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes talked about the negotiations and very much the longer-term perspective that is needed, and powerfully spoke about the importance of the processing industry, and I thought that was a very valuable concept as well. I was very pleased to see that she was heaping praise on the £100 million UK seafood fund brought in by the Conservative government in 2021 to support the future and the sustainability of the UK fisheries and seafood sector. So I thank her for praising that Conservative introduction. The honourable member for St Ives talked powerfully about safety and again echoed many of the themes about science in this as well. My honourable friend, who I sat with on the EFRA Select Committee throughout the last Parliament, the member for Brent West, and we received many regular briefings from DEFRA about the complexities of negotiations moving into the fishing negotiations. He talked powerfully about science and the importance of science and sustainability and data and monitoring, and again very powerfully about safety implications in fishing. Now, I'm going to move now to the Western Isles, and I'm going to struggle to pronounce this, so help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The member for Nain Alinar. He spoke very powerfully about safety, and also from his unique perspective representing Ireland and rural communities, and talked about very passionately about the appeals for quotas to the Minister as well. So moving on, it's important to highlight the benefits that we can and should reap following our departure from the European Union. For our fishing industry, this departure gave us the opportunity to increase our fishing quotas, and that's something I'm pleased that the last Conservative government did take advantage of. As members will be aware, the last government began the process of replacing the EU's flawed common fisheries policies, I think we've agreed on that, with a new bespoke framework for UK fisheries. 6 fisheries management plans were consulted on, covering major species, including bass, scallop, lobster and crab. The last government negotiated quotas of 750,000 tonnes in 2024, an 80,000 tonne increase compared to 2023, which was expected to deliver a £70 million boost for the fishing industry. Please can the Minister provide clarity to us for the sector and for us here that what the government hopes to achieve in the quotas for next year and how it's going to approach negotiations for 2026 and longer into the future. A significant fear is that the government may use fishing as a bargaining chip in negotiations with the EU. So can the Minister quash those rumours now and assure our fishing communities right across the United Kingdom that this government will not let them down, as the government is currently doing to farmers with their inheritance tax and their family farm tax policies? So we'd like to see some reassurance from the Minister on that point. The new government has published consultations for the next 5 fisheries management plans, which I welcome. Can the Minister confirm that these will remain live documents, constantly open to review and updates and improvements to ensure that these FMPs reach their objectives? Now, as we've said, in December 2021, the Conservative government allocated £100 million to specifically support the long-term future of our UK fishing sector, and this is supporting job creation and boosting seafood exports to new markets. Can the Minister clarify for us if the government is going to continue and provide any additional funding to benefit the long-term future of the UK fishing sector? Can the Minister also commit to publishing an impact assessment of the government's new labour and employment reforms, including the increase in national insurance contributions and specifically the impact that this might have on the fishing industry, including the fish processing sector and also in coastal communities? I'm also keen to press the Minister on several issues that we encountered on the EFRA Select Committee, on areas that I led on in certain respects. I hope that the Minister today can provide some clarity on the government's position, not least because the sector have waited with considerable concern following the general election, as the Labour manifesto was pretty short, if not failing to mention fishing at all in it. Now, when the EFRA Select Committee in the last Parliament last year published its cross-party report on marine mammals, a report and an inquiry that I triggered, it highlighted the issue of bycatch, in which seals, dolphins and other sea life are tragically snarled in fishing gear. Sadly, it is estimated that over 650,000 marine mammals die each year from being needlessly caught worldwide, including estimated over 1,000 cetaceans in UK waters. Now, the last government consulted on the introduction of remote electronic monitoring. Electronic monitoring systems utilise a range of technology, including cameras, gear sensors, GPS units and more. The last government began to implement electronic monitoring systems in all priority fisheries with the aim of achieving this by 2029. These monitoring systems apply to all vessels over 10 metres in length, active within fisheries within English waters, including non-UK vessels. Once satisfied that implementation issues have been resolved for each priority fishery, the plan was to make it mandatory to have these systems installed. It was noted that 2 years' notice would be given to allow vessels time to adapt and for installation to take place. Can the Minister confirm what the government is going to do in this regard, whether this remains the plan and what the timescales are moving forward? Now, currently, marine management organisation rules state that fishermen and women in UK waters must self-report all cetacean bycatch within 48 hours of their fishing journey. However, very few reports are submitted. According to the Marine Management Organisation, 6 marine mammals were reported by fishing vessels as bycatch injury or mortality in 2023. Now, this is in stark contrast with the last government's bycatch monitoring programme, which estimated that between 502 to 1,560 harbour porpoises, 165 to 662 common dolphins, and 375 to 872 seals, both grey and harbour, were captured as bycatch in UK fisheries in 2019. Does the Minister agree with me that this suggests that there is a significant issue with the underreporting of cetacean and other marine mammal bycatch? Can the Minister clarify what the government is doing to improve the monitoring, reporting and prevention of such tragic and really upsetting bycatch? I've worked closely with the Whale and Dolphin Conservation, World Cetacean Alliance, Sussex Dolphin Project and Blue Marine Foundation, all great organisations which seek to make fishing safer for the marine mammals that share the seas and oceans that we harvest the fish from. Can the Minister commit to working with organisations such as this to tackle this issue, which I'm sure probably unites us in humanity, that no one wants to see these air-breathing mammals caught up horrifically as part of the fishing industry? The UK also has a very important global soft power role to play internationally. I would postulate, like all members of this House, am strongly opposed to the hunting of any cetaceans, dolphins, whales or porpoises. There is no humane way to kill a whale. and this barbaric practice must end. While we know there is a tradition in the Faroe Islands of killing pilot whales and dolphins for meat and other products, I know that the previous government long expressed its concern over the welfare of these cetacean hunts and the levels of domestic regulation currently in place. Ministers in the previous government urged the Faroe Islands to look at alternatives to the hunting of dolphins and encouraged them to consider the many economic and social benefits that responsible cetacean watching can bring to coastal communities. During the Joint Committee on Trade with the Faroe Islands in 2022, ministers at the time raised the UK's opposition to the continued hunting of dolphins in Faroe Islands on both animal welfare and conservation grounds. Therefore, I hope that the minister confirm that the new government will uphold the previous government's position and use every appropriate opportunity to advocate for the end of cetacean hunts in the Faroe Islands. This, sadly, is an issue which stretches further than the Faroe Islands, Dr. Hook, with whaling horrifically still practiced in various countries, including Norway, Iceland and Japan. Can the Minister outline how the government is approaching countries which still conduct whaling, and what steps... I will give way.
Only to say that he missed out the United States of America from that list.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. Will the Minister outline the government is approaching these countries that are still conducting whaling operations, and what steps in international negotiations it's helping to stop this cruel practice? When negotiating fishing arrangements or trade deals or any negotiations, our UK diplomats and ministers must make the ethical case to these countries that these unacceptable practices must end. Can the Minister reassure this House that the new Labour government will continue to play its part on the world stage to end whaling once and for all? It's important to work collaboratively with our international partners to ensure global waters can thrive. Sustainability in fishing is pivotal to preserve these diverse ecosystems. Indeed, using a scientific, evidence-based approach, ensuring high ecological and environmental standards in fishing from all fishing countries is paramount for sustaining our precious seas, oceans, and ensuring responsible global trade. I welcome the introduction of highly protected marine areas, which protect all species and habitats-associated ecosystem processes within the site boundary, including the seabed and the water column. HPMAs allow the protection and full recovery of marine ecosystems. By setting aside some areas of the sea with high levels of protection, HPMAs allow nature to fully recover to a more natural state and allow the ecosystem to thrive. Can the Minister update members on the government's plans in terms of the development of HPMAs? I will give way. Yeah.
I'm interested in what the Honourable Gentleman says about HPMAs. Would he agree with me that the government in Whitehall should learn the lessons from the experience of the government in Edinburgh, in that if we are to move to that level of protection, then it is of absolute primary importance that the communities that are going to be most closely affected are brought along with them. And this is not something that is just visited on communities in a top-down closure that would result in the economic ruin that we would have seen in Scotland.
I thank the Right Honourable Member for that intervention. It's so important, I agree, to have joined-up thinking right across the United Kingdom, and that communities are consulted so that actually, if you are designating different areas of our seas and oceans potentially, that you make sure that harvesting the sea goes along in parallel with conserving the sea. And I think consulting and having joined-up thinking right across this United Kingdom is so important. Finally, it's important to touch on how dangerous fishing is, and this has been spoken about powerfully by many members across the chamber today. It's undeniably a dangerous and demanding industry, and we've heard powerful interventions on this. I welcome measures to improve safety in fishing. There's more we need to do, and I think this debate today has shone a light on that, and I urge the government to move ahead on a cross-party basis to see what we can do to make this a much safer industry. Also, it has been touched on, my honourable friend, the member for Brent West, touched on the stress and anxiety within the profession, and I want to touch briefly on mental health, because the mental health of our fishing communities is something that is very, very fragile as well, when they have such a tough industry, an unsafe industry with financial pressures, not knowing what's going to happen with the negotiations moving forward. And we know that people who are struggling with their mental health, certainly in the farming sector, statistically it shows people who are struggling with their mental health are more likely to have accidents as well on farms. And that probably is going to be the same case in the fishing industry, if people are really struggling with their mental health. So I think it's so important that we acknowledge that and we support that. And I want to commend today the work of several charities that help in this area, such as the Bearded Fishermen Charity, Fishermen's Mission, Fish Well, the Angling Trust, all of which do an amazing job in working with fishermen and women to support their mental health. Can the Minister join me and outline what specific support he believes that we can give as a government and cross-party to put in place to support our fishing communities with their mental health? Because if we want sustainability of fishing, we need to have sustainability within the people within that profession, and we need to nurture that, and we need to support that moving forward. To conclude, Dr. Huck, fishermen and women, fish processors and coastal communities all do incredibly tough and dedicated work to help the UK's food security, as powerfully said by my colleague here and friend from Gordon and Buchan and colleagues across the chamber. So important for feeding the nation with healthy, locally sourced and processed food that is key to a balanced diet. Now, Mike Cohen, the Chief Executive of the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations, has said that the costs of doing business as a fisher and the rewards to be attained from it also need consideration in government policy. I do hope that the Minister can agree with that, and the views of all the key fishing stakeholders and communities will always be considered at the heart of future policy making.
For His Majesty's Government, Minister Daniel Zeichner.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, Ms Huck. And could I start by congratulating and thanking the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland and the Chair of the Select Committee, not just for securing this debate today, which is really important. And I would say I think the debate has been conducted in a very, very civil and constructive way, and I look forward to similar discussions as we go through this Parliament. But also thank him for his continued commitment to championing the industry, of which he is extremely knowledgeable. Orkney and Shetland are crucial parts of the UK's seafood industry, and their rich fishing grounds and aquaculture sites provide quality produce that is in demand across Europe and beyond. And I was very, very pleased to visit in the summer, back in the summer, at the end of August. In fact, listening to many contributions today, I realise I've had the pleasure of visiting many of the members' constituencies. And, of course, we've heard some excellent accounts from members. The very excellent selling job from my honourable friend for Grimsby, a very powerful account of the importance of processors, and also that perhaps not widely understood point that so much of the fish we consume is actually not caught, sadly, by our own fishing fleet, but is actually, of course, frozen and brought from other parts. And also, I have to say, obviously, very strong representation from Scotland and also from the southwest, of course, and a similarly strong selling job, I thought, done by the member for Truro and Falmouth. And I would also just, in passing, pass thanks to Chris Ramford and those who made me so welcome there back in the summer. And also, had the pleasure, when I was in Shetland, hearing directly from some of the organisations there, the Scottish Fishermen's Association and the Shetland Fishermen's Association. So there are many people to whom I am grateful for informing me on what is a hugely complicated as well as hugely important issue. I was very struck by the contributions made around the safety issues and the danger that the people working in this industry face. It is a really difficult and dangerous job. One of my first visits actually was in my own part of the country to King's Lynn. And I remember standing on the quayside on a very cold January morning, looking at the relatively small craft setting out into the grey, thinking this looks like a very, very tough job. And it really is. And of course the risk has been well outlined by a number of the members who have spoken. The right honourable gentleman who introduced the debate made those points very strongly, the member from Dumfries and Galloway, and of course the member for St Ives. And again, I'm grateful to him for his not only his very warm words today, but his very warm welcome when I visited his constituency. But we should all echo our thanks to the people who do these tough jobs. And the department, I can tell you, the Marine Accident Investigation Branch published its 2023 annual report back in October, sadly reporting on a year in which 3 fishing vessels were lost, with the loss of 4 lives. 4 tragedies, far too many, and we heard from others about tragedies in the past. But having said that, I think the industry deserves praise for their efforts to improve safety, and that good work must continue, including addressing as a priority concerns flagged by the Marine Investigation Branch about sometimes potential underreporting. Now, I'll try and turn to the points raised by members in the debate, but I'd start by setting out some of the priorities that the government has, because I think that was also sought from a number of members. Now, we absolutely recognise that the fishing and seafood industry is a culturally significant part of the UK and integral to many, particularly of our more remote coastal communities. Our fishing fleet and associated onshore activities play an important role in boosting the growth of regional and coastal economies, providing jobs, and the industry plays a vital role in our food security, bringing a nutritious source of food to dinner tables across the country. Now, my job title is Minister for Food Security, and I very much see the fishing sector as playing a vital role in feeding the nation. Through our fisheries management and our international responsibilities, the UK is absolutely committed to managing our fisheries in a sustainable way, and I think that's a point that was echoed by virtually every contribution made. By meeting our responsibilities, we will support a vibrant, profitable and sustainable fishing industry alongside a productive and healthy marine environment. And that goal, getting that balance, I think, again, is shared by everyone. What we, of course, now have as an independent coastal state is the ability to pursue our own approach to managing fisheries both at home and on the international stage. We want to work increasingly closely with industry to make sure we deliver the best outcome for the UK. And I'm really keen, and this is a point I'll come back to, that we co-create policy with those who are impacted by it. And this is a point that is made repeatedly by the Secretary of State.
Will the Minister give way on that point?
Very happy to.
Too many meetings on the point of consultation, too many meetings are held in the middle of the day, in the middle of the week. And this creates a huge burden to some of the fishers that want to attend these meetings. And they're often held in Newlyn or Brixton, the sort of main centres, which can also create logistical challenges for those wanting to voice their views on the formation of fisheries management plans. So will the Minister consider this when trying to reach that more hand-in-glove consultation with our fishing communities?
My honourable friend makes an important point, and it is a point indeed I used to make from opposition, and it is one which I've impressed upon officials, and I think the effort has been made to make sure that wherever possible that is done. It is not always easy to find the right times, but we're doing everything we can to make sure that we can. So this government will always back the British fishing industry. We're absolutely keen to boost trade, deliver benefits to UK businesses, as well as push for sustainable fishing opportunities for British vessels. But we do recognise the huge challenges the sector is facing, and we are engaging closely with industry to create a more secure, sustainable and economically successful fishing industry, which we believe in turn will support local communities. Now, on some of the specifics that were raised around post-2026 access, as I'm sure honourable friends will be aware, a full and faithful implementation of the fisheries heading of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement will see access for EU vessels to the UK zone become a matter for annual negotiation to sit alongside our annual consultations on catch limits with a range of coastal states and international fora on fishing opportunities, and that is significant. Now, of course, we will always listen to what the EU has to say on the matter, but we are absolutely determined to protect the interests of our fishers and continue to fulfil our international commitments to protect the marine environment. And the Right Honourable Gentleman rightly asked who will be leading this, and the discussions will be led by my Right Honourable friend in the Cabinet Office. And who will speak up for UK fishers? Well, the answer is the UK Fisheries Minister, which is me. And I have to say I admired the Honourable Gentleman's slight cheek, I thought, when he challenged me not to let fishers down in these negotiations. I don't want to dwell on past misery, but let's say we are determined to do much better. Because, very happy to.
Does the Minister not acknowledge that actually in the last year the tonnage that was actually secured for the United Kingdom was greater, and actually that was one of the benefits of the negotiations? Does he not acknowledge the facts of tonnage?
I recognise that there have been some opportunities, not many, but some, and of course we will do our very best to make more of them. But I have to say that I do not get a general sense that people look back in the fishing sector and think that that was our finest hour. So I think we can do better. And of course our ambitions for fisheries are no longer tied to the EU Common Fisheries Policy. I will.
Yeah, really. I mean, on the back of that, I mean, he's making a very strong point. I mean, all we have to do is to go and talk to the pollock fishermen in Cornwall to find out how they feel about what has happened in the last year.
Indeed. I mean, I'm not sure that the two things are directly related, but what I would say is that, having spoken to the pollock fishermen, I'm under no illusion about how difficult the situation they face. There are a series of reasons, I think, why they had particular problems. But we now have the opportunity to set our own objectives for the UK fishing industry. And as I've already set out, we want a thriving, sustainable fishing industry in the future. Now, in terms of our ongoing negotiations with the European Union, fishing opportunities for 2025 of jointly managed stocks between the UK and the EU are currently, as we speak, under negotiation. And again, I suspect members will know this well, but it's an important and complex agreement covering 74 quota stocks and arrangements for non-quota stocks too. And in these negotiations, as in others, we balance the objectives of the Fisheries Act 2020 and the Joint Fisheries Statement to achieve outcomes that can support both the environmental and economic sustainability of our fisheries. Now, we do start, and it's been referenced extensively, including by Honourable friend and Member Brent East, with the best available scientific advice, including advice on maximum sustainable yield where that is available. Now, members have also raised the so-called UK-EU-Norway trilateral negotiations, which are also taking place as we speak in Oslo, and we're hoping that they will come to a conclusion before the end of the week. Those negotiations secure around a third of the UK's quota opportunities, and UK objectives will include following scientific advice closely in setting those quotas and securing workable arrangements on Northern Shelf cod. I'd be very happy to give way.
Have in recent years, if you'll excuse the pun, taken rather a battering. I wondered if the Minister would care to comment on what he's doing to ensure that my constituents, and indeed constituents of all members, will continue to be able to tuck into that tasty British staple.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising the challenge facing the fish and chip shop sector. They are an iconic part of our national landscape, and they have indeed suffered heavily from rising costs. So these negotiations are really, really important. But let's all send out a clear message of our strong support for the future of the UK fish and chip sector. And I'm just finding my place here. Yeah. Now, turning to the annual bilateral negotiations with Norway and Faroes, they are also in progress. It's a very busy time of year, as members probably realise. These are focusing on quota exchanges and access to each other's waters. And turning back to the point I made about the Secretary of State really wanting to encourage co-design, when he was appointed in July, he made it clear he wanted to improve the way DEFRA engages with stakeholders and put more emphasis on co-delivering DEFRA's policies and programmes in partnership with stakeholders. So it was in that spirit that this year I've asked sectoral groups for this year's UK-Norway fisheries negotiations to send proposed quota exchanges to government, which, if deemed viable, will be presented to Norway, because I'm determined that we try and do things differently and try to make this co-delivery model work. And I'm sure my honourable friend from Grimsby will be listening closely to this. I know that UK fisheries and members representing constituencies around Humberside will be particularly interested in those negotiations to secure those distant water fishing opportunities. So let me note, I very much value the contribution that UK fisheries make to the UK fisheries and seafood sector. They're important, very welcome part of the UK fishing industry. But we do need to remember that the total allowable catch for Arctic cod, one of the main stocks they've historically targeted in the Arctic, has fallen dramatically in recent years, down by about 60% since 2021. And the TAC is now at its lowest level since the early 90s. So securing a very large amount of Arctic cod for that sector is extremely challenging against the backdrop of a rapidly declining stock. Now, there was also reference, quite rightly, to the Fisheries Management Plan programme, and the honourable gentleman asked me to say a little bit about that. We're absolutely grateful to the support of the fishing sector and wider stakeholders in helping to shape these plans. We do completely support them. We think they're the right way forward. They're being developed collaboratively with the industries. They will play a crucial role in supporting the long-term sustainability of businesses and delivering growth in coastal communities. And it's interesting because they are internationally recognised now, and I pay credit to the previous government for their work on this. They're recognised as a gold standard in managing fisheries. They protect and, where necessary, set out to maintain or restore fish stocks to sustainable levels. So we are currently consulting on our next batch of fisheries management plans. I acknowledge that it's sometimes a challenge for people in the sector to keep up with all this work, but it really is important, and we're really committed to working closely with people to co-design sustainable fisheries management policies, including implementing the short, medium and long-term actions set out in some of those plans. So we laid our first fisheries management plan related statutory instrument on the 16th of October. This implements some actions from our first fisheries management plans, many of which included suggestions from the industry. But beyond that, we're also progressing a wider set of other fisheries management reforms which are in line with our own domestic priorities as an independent coastal state. And this touches on some of the points that members have raised, the way we manage discards, the introduction of remote electronic monitoring. And I would, at this point, pick up the points, the very powerful points made by the honourable gentleman around cetacean catches, which I absolutely share his concern. And we are absolutely committed to continuing with remote electronic monitoring. It's started to be introduced. We think it's got a real potential to transform how we get that better data, which many members have referred to. We think in the future it could inform the science, improve traceability, and improve fisheries management. So we're working to implement remote electronic monitoring in priority fisheries over the next 5 years. We're going to start with volunteers to design and test systems. We started work this summer with volunteers within the large pelagic trawl fishery, the Frank Boniface. It's the largest vessel in the fleet, primarily targeting mackerel, herring and blue whiting. And I very much hear his point about the concern that I think many of our constituents raise about the Faroe crustacean hunts, and I can absolutely assure him that ministers continue to make that point strongly to our colleagues in the Faroes. And absolutely.
I'm grateful that the Minister's acknowledging these points about the importance of protecting marine mammals whilst we were harvesting from the seas and the oceans. Is he going to address the other countries when he's around the table with his officials, countries like Norway or potentially his colleagues in the Trade Department when they are negotiating arrangements with Japan, that the prospect of talking about the horrific nature of whaling continuing in the 21st century, can he assure everyone that this UK government will stand firm and use its power within those rooms to put an end to whaling right across this world?
I think we can speak with one voice from this Parliament on those kind of issues, and I can assure him that at events such as the G20 and the G7 that I've attended, we have absolutely been raising these important questions. Let me turn to the coastal state negotiations on quota shares.
Before he does,
I will.
On the point of fishery management plans, could he perhaps look at what we might learn from the American fish management plans, which are really gold standards and have clear management objectives in them, which I'm afraid many of ours lack?
Minister.
I will certainly have a look at that. What I would say to the, my honourable friend is, of course, these are relatively early days in terms of the fisheries management plans, and a huge amount of work has had to go in quite quickly. But I think what we've established together is that we have a good structure to look into the future, a much better way, I would suggest, than have been done in the past. Now, on the quota shares, it's because we are now an independent coastal state that we have the right to negotiate with coastal states in the North East Atlantic on management measures for mackerel, blue whiting and Atlanto-Scandian herring, important stocks of the UK which have been overfished in recent years because there are no sharing arrangements in place between the coastal states. So we continue to push for comprehensive quota sharing arrangements that are in the best interests of stock sustainability and of the UK catching and processing sectors. And it sees we see the three-way management arrangement with Norway and Faroes that we signed in June this year as an important stepping stone towards securing a fully comprehensive deal on mackerel. A number of members, I think probably almost all the speeches at one point or another, touched on the very challenging issue of marine spatial prioritisation. We know that there is considerable pressure being put on the fishing sector by all the competing demands we've got on our seas. And we know the seas are only going to get busier over the coming decades. I think my honourable friend from South East Cornwall and the member for Gordon and Buchan both raised these points. We absolutely need to factor in increasing spatial pressures and new activities such as the growth of new types of energy. And as a government, we'll be very, very carefully considering the evidence that's been marshalled by the cross-government marine spatial prioritisation programme for English waters. There's lots of work going on this, and I am absolutely determined we have a full and open debate and dialogue, because it is such a complicated issue. But I'm very grateful for the very constructive engagement that we're having with industry representatives. Moving on to labour shortages, and again this was raised by the Right Honourable Gentleman at the beginning and many others. We're absolutely, of course, aware of the concerns about labour shortages in the sector. Very telling, I thought, the points made about the opportunities that are there if only we had the people to do the work. My department's working with industry to understand what we can do to alleviate those labour shortages, but they have to be understood in the context of our wider immigration policy objectives, and people will understand that there is an ongoing dialogue with the Home Office around that. So my pledge is that we will work closely with industry to understand people's labour needs, including, of course, what can be made to make the industry more attractive to the domestic labour market, which I know is an issue which people have worked really, really hard on, and some of the training points I thought were really quite uplifting. It's very good to hear about the work being done in Grimsby. So there is... I will.
Thank you very much. I want to ask what the government can do to assist with training for the fishing fleets, not least from landlocked areas. For example, in the west of England, we're very keen to promote training for things that are not necessarily associated only with our area, but also elsewhere. And I wondered if the government were having any discussions with Metro Mayors and others with large budgets for training and skills.
Minister.
I'll happily have a discussion with anyone who's got a large budget at the moment, actually. So, yes, I will happily come and have a discussion with mayors. But we've also recently launched the UK Seafood Careers Project, which does work closely with industry, works across government and devolved administrations to look at how the sector can improve the recruitment and retention of UK workers. So please be assured we are in constant dialogue and discussion with our colleagues in the Home Office and in the education sector to see what we can do on this. Let me also pick up a point made at the beginning by the Right Honourable Gentleman around enforcement and around illegal fishing. We absolutely condemn any illegal fishing taking place anywhere, but particularly in English waters and UK waters, which is partly a devolved issue. We work closely as a department with the Marine Management Organisation, with the inshore fisheries and conservation authorities, and with other organisations. In fact, I was only talking to the Marine and Maritime Organisation about this yesterday. We use a risk-based, intelligent-led marine enforcement model, regular inspections in ports, onshore and at sea, and that should ensure that appropriate arrangements are in place to enforce fisheries regulations and protect our water. But I was very interested to hear the Right Honourable Gentleman's account of the approach being taken in Ireland. I will look closely at that because... Yeah.
Does he actually believe that the discard ban is being observed? And if he has doubts about that, would he agree that making sure that there is onboard cameras and monitoring is the best way to ensure that we can then make an end to this element of illegal fishing?
Minister.
I very much hear what he says. I agree that the evidence rather suggests that we could do much better, and that is why we are making that commitment to the remote electronic monitoring. Let me come to close to a conclusion, Ms Huck. Many have talked about support for inshore fishers. We're absolutely determined to do more. We're looking at the role of the inshore and under 10-metre fleet, looking at how best we can support them. We think a number of initiatives will benefit them. We're looking at provision of additional quota, looking at new quota trials, which we believe will help the fleet in the long run. We are engaging with the 5 regional fisheries groups that have been set up for inshore fishers to discuss concerns with policymakers and regulators, helping to identify problems, contribute to policy development and secure solutions. Certainly on my trips around the shores of this country, I've been very struck by the concerns that people have and the points that were raised around some of the boat inspections. Obviously, that's a responsibility of the Department for Transport, but I continue to pursue that. And to bring this perhaps to a conclusion, I've been very struck also by the calls from key figures in the fishing industry, including Mike Home from the NFFO, for a proper fisheries strategy. And I'm very interested to talk to stakeholders in the industry in more detail about what that might look like, again, in the spirit of collaboration and co-design that we want to introduce. So, in final conclusion, let me thank honourable members. I think it's been a really informative and useful debate. There are things that have been raised that I'll take away and raise with officials today. I recognise just how tough, as I said at the beginning, this industry is in terms of the work involved, the safety issues, but I also recognise that it feels particularly tough as an industry at the moment. It's hard. But I genuinely think there are real opportunities ahead for the fishing sector, and this government's absolutely committed to making the most of them to ensure the industry can best contribute to our country's food security and economic growth.
To respond, Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Dr Huck. Can I thank you and Mr Efford for your efforts in sharing us today? I think we have had a genuinely excellent debate today. I think something in the region of 19 members of Parliament have taken part in it. I would observe in passing that we have outlasted not one but 2 main debates in the Chamber, plus petitions and an adjournment. If that doesn't make the case for us retaking our rightful place back in the Chamber next year, then I don't know what does. I thank the Minister for a very comprehensive response to the debate. It will gladden his heart to know I am confident that the Select Committee will be wanting to run the rule over quite a lot of the material that we have had here today. because, and I genuinely thank all members who have taken part, because it's important that we understand that this isn't a contest between urban communities and fishing communities, that actually this is something where there is an interest for us all to be served here. And to that extent, I would just finally place on record, in relation to the contribution from the Honourable Gentleman for Brent North, as a little bit of context, that for the last 3 years we have set quotas for North Sea haddock and whiting well below the IC's advice, something that was supported by the fishing industry. We all have opportunities to learn from each other.
The question is that this House has considered the fishing industry. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. I think the ayes have it. Order, order.